I mean, he's got. Yeah. If you're on the task force, grab some lunch and pack your seat, and we are going to try and get started.
Maybe not to this group.
Less out now.
But I've had people say, no.
Yeah.
Then I'm scared, like, I don't know tomorrow. Tired the whole week.
Yeah, that's what are you?
Last night. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
We met at.
Yes, that's good.
On the road here.
Good time, yeah. Sorry, I gotta get tutorial on
Better than that.
Yeah, there's a couple.
I'm not sure how.
I think they ran out.
I should have my. Okay. Okay.
Was that, yeah, I did say, it said start
I
eating
didn't know
now.
if I normally have a real name tag on.
You can.
Lunch, we're gonna try and get started in about 6 minutes. Six. Yeah.
The only thing that I'm actually worried about is I eat a little bit of bread. I'm not really like, I don't know.
Okay, good.
And I brought a bar because I'm always like,
Yes.
candy. Yeah.
I wanted them to do it in person last month, but they were worried. Maybe last. Over there, you can grab food and any place there's a chair. We go.
They use it sometimes, but.
I'm talking about ours. I don't know if you live in.
They're not. I mentioned.
They're not.
No.
All right, I'm gonna make this.
Party, yeah.
You're about time to start, yeah. So like you grab food and find your seats, then find your name tag if you haven't yet. If you're a designee, take the name tag for your own name on the back. Let's work it that way. Alright, I'm starting the webinar and starting recording.
Already throwing elbows in the water right now. Took like 2 minutes.
How are you? I am probably 3 years. Or maybe not, maybe a water. There are. We're gonna. And then they're eating up, and then we're gonna reach out. Yes, we need to.
Yeah, and you're the used to make your.
Yeah.
Like, so.
That's my thing.
Did you come down? Morning?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Bunch of traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not here sure. An hour.
Catch up before they.
Made it.
I know, how's it been? Yeah. How's it going? We're still trying. I want a beer. But I'm still there. We're trying to. Do well with that. Also. Yeah, I love that.
All right, we're gonna get started in about 2 minutes. You're missing out, everybody's.
Hi, you made it.
I did, yeah. You were.
The applicant or are waiting in line to kind of really quiet voices, so because we are gonna get started. Yes.
Seen him in years. I saw him on the list for next week.
Yes.
So excited to see you. Yes. That should be a fun trip.
That was a good conversation.
I assume that'll be.
That's there too. Welcome, everyone. It is 12:02 and we will get started. Welcome to the second meeting and our first in-person gathering of the Colorado River Drought Task Force. It's really exciting to see everyone face to face and in 3 dimensions and to be sharing a meal around the table. Welcome to the public. I see right now about 44 folks online, so we are glad to see you here as well. My name is Kathy Chandler Henry. I'm the chair of the task force, and I'm here today with members of the Langdon group who will be facilitating our meetings. We have Kelsey McElroy in the back, Jordan Brock here, there's Kelsey on TV, and Siobhan Locke over here in the corner. Welcome. I wanted to do a quick overview of the agenda, overview of how to participate if you are a member of the public here, and then we will jump into introductions. I know we did introductions last time, but it's I think it would be helpful for us on the public since we are in person. On the agenda, we've got a discussion of where we're going, how we're going to get there, sort of the meat of the work that we're going to do together. We have a presentation on open meeting laws from the Legislative Council staff. We've got a brief section on logistics. We have some information that has been sent to us and it's out there now on the website. You may or may not have had a chance to look at that, but it is on crdroughttaskforce.com and it is in the resource section. We have some information from CWCB and from the Colorado River District. Both Amy Ostick and Andy Mueller from those organizations are going to give just a high level overview of what's in those packets. They're pretty thick, so we know what we have. Kevin Ryan is here, a member of the task force, and is going to give an overview of compact compliance and the view from the state engineer's office. We'll have a chance to have some discussion around that, ask questions of those folks. This is also a chance for you, if you've got information that you think would be helpful for the task force, to add that to the resources that are available online. And you can certainly have a section of the next meeting if you want to just go over the information that you have that may be helpful to the group. We did get a letter last night from a consortium of environmental and conservation group. I emailed that out to you all this morning. You may not have seen that yet, but that is in your inbox and that will be posted on the website as well. Any questions before we sort of jump into getting going here? Yes, Kelsey.
I just want to make a quick announcement for everyone in the room. So for the people that do have a panelist link that will be sharing their slides later, please make sure that your computer is muted and your speakers are turned off, because the speakers in here are very powerful and pick up everything, which is awesome.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. We did have a correction on the notes that were sent out. Kate Greenberg had a misspelling on her name and a clarification of the interaction with the public, noting that task force members can talk to members of the public outside of open meeting laws. So we will make that clarification on the notes. We'll have notes from this meeting. So if you have a chance between now and the meeting at the end of August, take a look at those. We will approve those at that time. And if there's any other corrections that you have on this meeting, you can email Kelsey or myself, or all right, for all the public who are here with us, we're grateful you're with us, maybe on a webinar, and if you are able to type comments in the Q&A. We won't be responding to those at this meeting, but we will be collecting all of those, and the Langdon group will be collating those for the task force and making sure that we see all of those. If you were watching on YouTube, you will be able to make comments through the Drought Task Force webpage. You can always email me or call me or the facilitator. And I'm just going to give you my cell phone number right now to note down if you do need to get in touch. It is 970-390-3104. So I think that is it for introductory remarks. Let's get started with introductions. And we're going to try and keep you each to 1 minute apiece. I know that's a tall order, but who are you? What organization are you with? Who are you representing? And just one sentence or so on how drought has affected you or your constituents over the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think I pause for just two
Yes.
quick housekeeping items, because I'm going to erase them
Okay.
in order to follow the conversation now. So Wi-Fi is an open network. If I assume you're all paying attention and not on your devices, but if you need this, there's no password needed, and the restrooms are just out here to your right. There's a first set and a second set as you walk further out. So now the conversation.
And we do have public in the room as well. And if you have comments, the same sort of rules apply. You can text me, you can put them on the website in the comment box, or you can do that through the webinar.
But I would ask, if you are here in person and you share a comment with someone verbally, will you also, like, assuming it's important for the process, will you also share it with Jordan or somebody so we can share it out to them?
That's fun. All right, let's start with you. Who are you? Who are you representing? And how has drought affected you and your constituents?
I'm Gerald Copenhaver. I live a couple miles south of Memphis, Colorado. I'm on the Southwest Conservation Board. I'm representing the water rights holder in that area. I have water rights on the Memphis River out of Jackson Gulch Reservoir. And I also have water rights in the George River. And then I have water rights to the Monson Valley Irrigation Company, which I'm also the president of. So I've been affected personally because there's not. Priority wise, the water hasn't been lasting as long through the summer. We've had a good run this summer, but through the last several years, it's affected not only myself personally, but the whole irrigation system of that area.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Wolf, I'm General Manager for Southwestern Water Conservation District. I sit in the seat that was assigned to the district. I was appointed by my board. And I think with everybody, the impact of the drought, since the district sort of represents all water users, we've seen it from agriculture, municipal, environmental, conservation, all aspects, just because of the hydrology.
Good afternoon, I'm Kyle Whitaker with Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. Drought, I worked for Kevin and Division Water Resources for almost 20 years on the Colorado main stem. I grew up in Western Colorado. Now I work on the east side of the divide. I've seen it a lot. 2002, as all of you know, was tough. And being in the water, administration world at that point and curtailing ditch after ditch after ditch that have never been curtailed. It's their livelihood. It's West Slope agriculture that was having to adapt, having to learn what that meant to do without water. And now, we haven't seen a year quite like 2002 since then, but, we've just adapted. Everybody in here has had to figure out ways to plan different, to engage different and to use water different. And I think this is just another opportunity for us to learn how to adapt going forward.
Yes, my name is Jose Madrigal. I'm the city manager for the city of Durango. I'm filling in for Melissa Youssef, who's our mayor. So just the alternate or designee here, looking to listen, take notes. And, I think what's been said is pretty much the same thing in Durango with drought affecting us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kate Greenberg, Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture. I think obviously with ag, we've been impacted directly, but one thing we don't always talk about related to drought is mental health and the mental health impact of sustained drought on our producing communities.
Hello, I'm Letitia Yazzie, the Water Resource Director for the Ute Tribe. And back in 2021, 2022, when the drought was bad drought year, the farm and ranch enterprise suffered a huge economic loss, and because of the reason being is our water rights are subordinated, so we had to use less. And if anybody wants to look at these pictures of the fields, I have them here and are able to look at. Thank you.
Can I clarify, since I'm writing this down, economic impacts on the tribe specifically? What you said on the economic impacts on, I just want to make sure I capture the audience that you're talking about specifically.
Yes, economic impact to the farm and ranch enterprise. Which is part of the tribe, yeah.
I'd love to get your maps and photos up on the website. I think that would be helpful if that's okay.
Lisa. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon at this point. Lisa Yellow Eagle. I'm representing the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. I am the tribal water attorney. In terms of the tribe itself, drought has affected, I think, all aspects. Agriculture, there's shorter growing seasons. It's affected the fire season. I think there's a longer fire season on Southern Ute lands. And it's my understanding that there's also a sense that there's less water for plant life and wildlife on tribal lands. And so it is affecting the environment and the tribe directly.
Hi, I'm Darius Jutton. I'm a 5th generation rancher in the Pkwy Valley in Uray and Montrose counties. I hold priority water rights in Uray County, which I am also the president of the Pkwy Valley Water Users Association. It's kind of ironic because when we've been in these drought years, Pkwy has the ability to call out 80% of the water out of Uray County, which are our neighbors. So that's made it hard working on the hydrology the last 20 years in the Pkwy Valley.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lee Miller. I'm the general counsel for the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District. I was appointed by the board to fill the spot that was designated in the legislation. The Southeastern is the project sponsor for the Frying Pan Arkansas project. We provide supplemental water to both municipal and irrigation in the Arkansas basin. So, when there's a bad year in the Arkansas, we provide a significant source of supplemental water to those. And when it's a bad year in the Colorado, we can't do that. So that's how the drought, we've had years where we've given a 1/10 of an acre foot per acre for water to the ditches. So it can be fairly significant.
Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Citron, Associate Director of External Affairs for the Nature Conservancy in Colorado. I am filling one of the environmental seats. I know it's a longer title that I don't have set to memory, but one of the environmental natural resources seats on the task force. And how is drought affected? I guess my constituents would be the natural environment. And those of us, probably all of us, who enjoy recreating it and spending time in it. I certainly don't need to tell everyone all the stories that you all see in your local communities of fish and wildlife struggling. We're seeing more fish kills from temperature and drought in the last few years that we have historically. And we're seeing impacts to communities with recreational economies that depend on boating and fishing associated with those flows. The Nature Conservancy also owns properties and water rights, and we're also struggling in some ways to adapt to drier conditions in managing our water on our preserves and other properties that we own. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Ryan. I'm the State Engineer and Director of the Division of Water Resources. And I'm that advisory non-voting member of this task force, which, as you'll see later on when I talk to you about a few things, I take that role very seriously and the uniqueness of that role very seriously. It's an interesting question for me. How has drought affected me and my constituents and everyone around this table? It's my constituents. And so when we hear the stories about struggling with drought and quite frankly, in some areas a very good spring, it's that's what you're experiencing as my constituents. As far as how has it affected me and my organization, I like to think that when people ask me that question, how are you dealing with the drought? How are you dealing with all this water? And we say prior appropriation. And it sounds a little bit like a harsh answer right now to say, we just have this approach to dealing with it. But it's a good reminder for all of us as we develop solutions today.
Jackie.
Good afternoon. I'm Jackie Brown. I am here representing an industrial water user located on the west slope, and my employer is Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. We're a not-for-profit wholesale electric generator and distributor with 43 members and 45 members, 42 member board that is made up of rural cooperatives from around New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. I would say that how drought has affected Tri-State is that we have in particular been the swing right on the Yampa River as the Yampa has been under administration in recent years. The secondary impact is in the greater Colorado River Basin, our hydropower allocation for water out of the CRISP system, the Colorado River Storage Project Act system, has declined in a way that has dramatically impacted our portfolio. It's a carbon-free resource, hydropower to us. It's a base load energy, one of the only forms of base load dispatchable power that is available to us in the Western United States. So that has been really hard as we have been in the transition from fossil fuels to renewables to also be dealing with that impact. The third way that it has impacted us as an organization is by directly impacting our cooperatives that purchase power from us and all of their the folks that make their livelihoods off of the availability of water. So the shortage that they have experienced since the supplies have gone down in those upper basin states has been great. And there many of the same impacts that Commissioner Greenberg mentioned. You know, it's a trickle down effect to be sure.
Yeah, Erin Carney, Executive Vice President with Carl Cattlemen's Association, and I am sitting in for Mike Gamblin and Carlisle Courier, so an alternate to an alternate. And so sitting in the statewide ag organization seats and our constituents as a whole in agriculture in Colorado, I would say a reminder of all that agriculture provides is food, open space, wildlife habitat. And I think when we think about the availability or this changing seasons of food, local food availability, or even wildlife habitat of how those wet meadows, high mountain meadows changes. So I would just say when we talk about adaptability, our producers are constantly having to adapt.
Good afternoon and welcome to Aurora, everyone. I'm Alexandra Davis. I'm the Assistant General Manager for the Water Supply and Demand Division of the Aurora Water Department. And I hope that you will all pay special attention when you drink our water, because we have won numerous taste tests and we're very, very proud of the drinking water that we provide every day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have over 700,000 customers now, about 400,000 in the city. We also have extraterritorial users who we supply water with. And thinking about how drought has affected us, this year has been a really interesting year. It was a banner snow year in many areas of the state. Aurora was the only city to go into stage 1 drought restrictions this year. And we had a tough time explaining to our council members why it was raining every day down here and we were in drought restrictions. And it's because of how our system works. We're a junior city. The city started creating its water supply portfolio in the 50s. 1950s, not the 1850s, and we rely on storage and the snow. So, for example, in the South Platte Basin snowpack was above average because of the Pkwy and the same rain. But where our water comes from, upper South Platte, it was actually significantly below average, and that was impacting a number of our different areas which just goes to show how water is regional and super local at the same time, right? And impacts can be regional and super local at the same time. I forgot to say I'm representing Front Range water providers who divert Colorado River water. One of the things that our system does is we are in the Arkansas, the Colorado, and the South Platte, and that gives us the ability to balance these types of shortages that we experienced this year. Fortunately, we're out of drought stage restrictions, but when we go into something like that, the way it impacts our constituents is their landscaping is at risk. And some people may say, so what, who cares about a lawn? But it impacts property values. It impacts their quality of life. We had to turn away several communities who were looking for water certainty, who didn't have a water supply, and their people were looking at Aurora to provide water. And we said, we can't even talk to you right now because we don't have enough for our people right now. So those extraterritorial users are then looking at increased costs.
River. I'm gonna stand
Oh,
there when it becomes more than a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. That's the-
Thank you. Thanks, Randy.
Good afternoon, Randy Kim with the City of Grand Junction, and I'm representing municipal water users within the Colorado River District area. And how drought has affected us. Well, within the Grand Valley, we participate in a drought response program collaboratively with the Water District, Clifton Water District, Town of Palisade, and a couple of the irrigation companies. And so we collectively see the impacts of drought on the Grand Valley and try to respond appropriately. For the city itself, we just completed recently our 50-year demand projections and also looked at our supply and under various drought scenarios and determined that we will have to supplement our primary drinking water source, which is Canna Creek on the Grand Mesa watershed, with Gunnison River water, which will be a considerable expense for us to upgrade, build new reservoirs, new pipes, pumps, treatment systems. And we're blessed with having very high quality water from the Canna Creek watershed, and of course the Gunnison River has much higher salinity and solids. So we're seeing the impacts of that at real dollar cost for the future of our customers.
Thank you. Kelly. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kelly Romero Heaney. I'm the Assistant Director for Water for Colorado's Department of Natural Resources, and I'm sitting here representing the department. I will say that drought for me personally has shaped my career. I started in hydrology in Northwest Colorado around the turn of the century when this 2-decade drought, 2+ decade drought began. Early on, I was a hydrologist working on federal lands, even got to detail on fire crews in 2002, worked in industry, agriculture, municipal water supplies, environmental water needs. And now I've had the opportunity in the last 2 years to translate that local experience statewide. My constituents are every water user in the state of Colorado. And if one part of our state is suffering, we're all suffering, because while yes, water is hyper local, it's also regional. And and obviously drought impacts every aspect of water. So thanks, Kelly. Bart.
Bart Miller, and I'm the Healthy Rivers Program Director for Western Resource Advocates. I'm one of the environmental representatives to the task force. And though there are a lot of impacts on the West Slope from drought, including impacts to recreation, local communities, agriculture, we've heard a lot of good firsthand. I'll hook us in on one particular, endangered fish. And I've been part of the Upper Colorado Endangered Fish Program for 20 years. And lower flows means drier years for fish, lower flows, especially in the summer months, in the lower Gunnison, the lower Yampa, the lower Colorado. And interestingly, what Jackie Brown was saying, that's also impacting endangered fish, because hydropower revenues used to be the source of money for the endangered fish program. Hasn't been for the last 2 years, in part because there isn't as much hydropower revenue. And I'll give City of Aurora an A+. For members of the audience, an A+ on the cup of water. Thank you, Alex, for hosting us.
I'll pass that along.
Can I just make sure I understand that the hydropower used to fund?
The endangered fish recovery program, but no longer can because there's enough money.
Andy, welcome.
Well, thank you. Andy Mueller, the General Manager of the Colorado River District. I would say, I think Steve, who I was listening to in my earbud as I was in traffic, covered our conservation districts do very similar things, and so the drought has impacted us very similarly. I would just point out that one of the consequences of living with drought that over the last 23 years has made a whole lot of our shared constituents throughout the state very concerned about their future. And there's real concern that there's not enough water for the future and for all of us to share with the environment, with nature, with the industries with the cities and the ag. And that, I would say our constituents never speak with one voice, but many of our constituents are hopeful that this task force will actually figure out some solutions that with this resource that will provide a pathway to the future.
Or did anybody speak in partway through and sit in one of those seats? I didn't see anything, but I
got-
want to make sure.
We got everybody, so thank you very much. I think that gives us a good grounding to get started. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the Langdon Group, and I want to start with a big thank you. They've been working under some pretty severe time crunches to not only get the content going, but to get websites up and running, to get lunch here, to find facilities, and you all are doing a great job. So thank you very much. We will be taking a break in about an hour, but if you need to get up and leave before then, please do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey, who's going to kick off with just an overview of Senate Bill 295.
Alrighty, I'm gonna have to hop back and forth between being on camera so people can see us on camera. They're able to see us even though our screen in here, just so you know, is the agenda. So I'll be hopping back and forth, but
Advance your slides through it.
that's okay. So. All right. So the next section, where are we going and how will we get there? So I have all of the language of the bill. I started trying to summarize it and put it up here, and then I realized I can't summarize it because we have things to talk about and we're gonna need that language. But I do have, other than this page, the rest of the bill verbatim up there. So we had asked you to read it before coming today. And rather than giving an overview, I am not a lawyer, I am not a legal expert, but I am a sociologist. And so what I do know, what a wise person once told me, is that when it comes to a law, there is what's written, what it does, and what people think it means. And often those are not the same things. So we figured it would be helpful to start off with a conversation just about what questions do you have about the language in the bill? What do we need clarification on? What do we have differing interpretations of? So I'm not going to go through the bill. Hopefully all of you have your copy, but I also can jump on the slides to different places.
Also, there are copies on the
Oh,
table.
yes.
It's for those who are in the room who may have not brought one. Feel free to help yourself to one. Additionally, for the people in the public who are watching, I'm going to erase this. It's going to be in the notes, so never fear. Probably couldn't see it from that anyway, but never fear, it will be recorded.
So rather than giving an overview, I just want to start with what questions jumped out at you?
Sub-task force,
Sub-task force.
which, when are we gonna be meeting?
Yes. All right, so that's section 2.5A. So establishing a sub-task force to study tribal matters. As we talked about last meeting, just mentioning who's on the task force, sub-task force again. Both Letitia and Lisa, as well as the designee of the Department of Natural Resources, which is Becky Mitchell. And she's the only person who's only on the sub-task force and is not an alternate here. And then 2 other members jointly appointed by the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and the department, and that's Steve Wolf and then Lee Hawkins, who is also the alternate for Aaron Citron. So the sub-task force is up to 4 meetings, and that's one of the things that we wanted to talk with you guys about today, later on, hopefully to schedule either the first meeting or talk about what we want to have trigger that first meeting.
We are recording these, some of which we will have full answers for today, some of which we may have to seek additional information. So I'm going to keep it here, and those we can answer, we will. Those we can't, we'll have to come back to you on, but we want to collect them. So who else has?
I have a question. I was gonna wait to see if anyone else had the same question. So when I'm a little confused on the mission that we have. So paragraph 4A says The purpose is to provide recommendations that will provide tools to the board to collaborate with stakeholders that to develop programs. So providing tools so that the board can collaborate with stakeholders to develop programs. And then 4B says the recommendations must provide that the programs be designed in a specific way. And I'm confused as to whether we're talking about tools or programs. Because tools for the board to collaborate with to develop programs is very different from us developing programs. So I would love some clarification on that.
It's a great question for clarification that will come at a later time that we cannot provide, but we'll work towards that. Anyone else is also welcome to respond.
Yeah, if anyone knows.
Other things as you read through this that brought questions or the need for clarification?
Jackie.
I guess I would just, my notes are similar to Alex's, so ultimately, there's a lot about what we could do. But I think that would be great to be on the same page about what we're planning to do as part of the written agenda for the 10 meetings or so that we'll have and where the update back to the committee will fit in there. Just maybe so we have some guidelines, and I know that's your job as a facilitator, but it's nice to be on the same page about where we're hoping to head so we can collectively put our energy that in that piece.
I can answer part of that from a process perspective, and we will still need to wait for some clarification from those who put this out in the universe. But how we are handling some of this uncertainty during the first couple meetings is that we have put together a framework that Kelsey will go over shortly, a timeline and a framework. The first couple of meetings are in sharper focus. The farther ones are a bit less so, and they're for us to determine as some of these things become clear. So I do think there's substantive work that can be done while we get some of these clarifications to continue moving forward, so we're not stagnant, but so we don't get out over our skis, as it were, while we wait for some of those clarifications. So we are trying to manage that on the process side.
And just I pulled up the part that says there is the requirement that we update the water resources and ag review committee, at least at one point during our tenure.
And when you say clarification, are you checking with the legislative bill sponsors or who is kind of providing you the overall guidance?
That is a great question that we are also open to having many answers on.
We are in touch with them, but they maybe not exclusively. Yeah, as we need to know what's these answers.
Yeah, one of the tenets of it, as it describes the programs, it says acquisition by the programs of the water right used for agriculture irrigation purposes is voluntary, temporary, and compensated. How do you acquire something and then only allow it to be used temporarily? To me, those two don't mesh very well. Is the acquisition for a temporary use?
Can you give me the section that's in, just so I can notate that?
It's for. Oh, good, it's for. Roman numeral 3.
24B3.
4-1B. Just for my two reference.
I'll jump in here. I think there clearly will be places we need clarification. I think there's also empowerment of this task force to make those recommendations to the committee and to the legislature. So we have some leeway to say, here is our interpretation, here's how we define programs, here's how we figure out those things that may have some inconsistencies, to be able to call those out, define them, and say, here's our recommendations of this. So it's a pretty unique group that has all of the players and all of the representation. So I think there are likely things that you all, that we all will think of that the legislative group putting this together did get clarification on, so I think we've got some ability to do that ourselves.
I would be hopeful that we can also include some of those in the minority report for like, you know, the things that were eliminated. Maybe we get clarification that a particular thing isn't within the letter, but I think it could still be included in that sort of other category to be and then hard.
I would just want to respond to Kyle. Cal, I mean, I don't want to get too lawyerly about it, but I think it's, you can acquire a leasehold interest in, or some other form of temporary interest in water right. We do it all the time in our state, and the System Conservation Pilot Program has the UCRC acquiring a temporary interest in those water rights. So I think we can do it. I understand what you're saying. I think when I read that language, I said, it sounds very similar. I mean, that's a discussion that's been around a long time in our state when talking about demand management, for instance, and the state has talked about temporary, voluntary, and compensated. But in order to have that, the state or some other entity would have to acquire that interest temporarily to be donated to or purchased from or leased. And purchased is probably right to leased in that situation.
Yeah, Bart here, just briefly, I think maybe the word that Kyle was bringing up is acquisition, right? And that does sound like something pretty solid, pretty permanent, but I think by the rest of that paraphrase, Andy Miller mentioned, it could be at least, could be a loan, could be a period of years.
We have the same law school class.
I thought it might be helpful for the group, for those that weren't around for the conceptual framework discussions at the roundtable levels, just to be aware of what Principle 4 says. That could be a good thing to bring. I mean, I can read it real quick, but just to offer that context, if somebody's not sure what that's referencing, and it's a collaborative program that protects against involuntary curtailment. It's needed for existing uses and some reasonable increment of future development in the Colorado River system, but it will not cover a new trans mountain diversion. And if somebody wants background on what the conceptual framework is, how it was negotiated, etc., it was included in the initial water plan as well. Maybe that's something that we can cover.
I did put it up here, even though the language wasn't in the bill, added in there.
Oh, you had the, oh, you did, oh, man, I should have read the slides. Sorry, Kelsey.
But I appreciate that because it saves me from having. That's right. I'm tired of it. So.
I just have a hazy memory, but I think Principle 4 was intended to operate within the whole framework, so it might be helpful for everyone to have a copy of the entire framework.
I agree.
As opposed to just pulling that partial out.
We have that up on.
I don't remember. I'm so sorry. I don't. Can you email you?
Yes.
You can email. Anytime you all mention any documents or anything that you would like to have added to the body of work that we are collecting, I'm making note of it and I will follow up with you on that. Aaron.
If we're identifying areas that we want to highlight, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there's two places where minimizing impacts or creating a program to provide at least secondary environmental benefits from operation of these tools is mentioned, which certainly think is an important consideration for this group. And the reference, which I just had, is for a one, which talks about minimizing disproportionate negative economic or environmental impacts to any single subbasin or region. And then for hang on, see, put it at the top of the page. 8. Not page 8. No, I'm sorry, that's not it. There it is. Maybe it's top of page 8. It is, I'm sorry. That provides direction to our state engineer. That includes, without minimizing the primary purpose of the program, to reduce or mitigate and safety commitments, provides benefits to recreation and the environment. I'm sorry, I'm to translate the citation.
I got it up here. Section
Thank
2,
you.
4B,
B
6.
6, yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's another question I have. I was really curious what was intended by the term interstate commitments. Because when I read the compacts, we don't have a delivery obligation. We may have obligations should compact compliance ever become a real thing, which says a very rocky road to get there. So I was really curious what was intended by, like, what commitments are we talking about? And I think it would be helpful for us to understand, because it seems like the charge is to look at drought in the Colorado River Basin and interstate commitments. So I would like some guidance on that piece.
2, 4K.
Unless Kevin already knows the answer.
Unless I already know.
Yeah.
Wow. Kelsey, you were looking, I think you know me well enough that I had a question on the tip.
You
of my
looked,
tongue.
yeah, you looked like you were ready to talk.
But I want to go back to Alex and Jackie's comments a little bit ago and just finish the rest of that sentence on the 4A. Or go to that, because Alex, part of the answer, or part of it, continuing part of the question, in 4A about 2/3 of the way down. Where it says programs that address drought and interstate commitments. And so those can be seen to be joined at the hip, but they can be two different things. And as water administrators, Jason Ullman and I think about which you're trying to do. So I guess I would challenge all of us at this table as you're working through this and venturing ideas and thoughts. Are you thinking about drought, or are you thinking about interstate commitments? Because I think we can be addressing one without addressing the other. And by interstate commitments, thank you, Alex, because anticipating that anticipatory effort, or is it something we need to do right now?
And thank you, Kevin, because I read those as two separate charges, right? Because drought is completely unrelated. Of course, they overlap, but they also don't they're separate and distinct.
To do one without the other.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions right now? All right, cool. If you do, you always can bring them up. All right, so we'll move through that. And we're going to move on now to setting up a roadmap. Randy asked a great question about process last time. And what we were working on at that time, which we couldn't show you because we didn't have this yet, is a potential roadmap for going forward. There's a lot of things up here, so I'll give everyone in the audience and the task force a minute to just read through it.
And then reading through it, note that there are also a lot of things that are not yet up here, that are tentative. So this is for us to continue to work on and define, but we wanted to give some framework to hang it on. Some things that are known and some that are yet to be determined.
For example, the report to the committee, we need to figure out where to plug
Yeah,
that in.
does that go?
We had that finalizing, but we did not put the data up there. I don't know why we didn't put the data up there.
It was usually asked about the subtask task force, and that's also noted in that upper right that
That the task force
dates are to be determined based on what we, as a group decide is the best timing for those.
So another thing of note is we originally scheduled 10 meetings total. There's only 9 up there because we don't have the July 31st one on there, which was that statutory obligation. It was a great obligation. So the other 2 task force meetings are going to be those public testimony open meetings. So we would like everyone, I keep saying we would like, you need to be there. I keep being nice about it. And stop being nice about it. It's a meeting, it's a task force meeting. And so either you or your alternate need to be there at those meetings. Right now, we tentatively would like to do one on Wednesday, the 13th of September, which is the night before our task force meeting. And we are hoping to do that in the Grand Junction, Montrose area. So on Wednesday, the 13th, we would have a task force meeting where there would be public, it would be a public comment meeting. So it is open to the public. And basically, we're not entirely sure what it's going to look like yet. We're still working on developing that, but it would be an opportunity for you all to sit down with people and have conversations. But it also is a task force meeting. And then the second opportunity would be the night before our September 28th meeting, which we have scheduled as virtual right now. But that September 27th, Wednesday, the 27th, tentatively would be another task force meeting for public comment on the Front Range. So we might shift that virtual meeting on the 28th to in person since everyone is already here for that public comment meeting. Again, these are tentative. A few grimaces.
It seems like the two public meetings are very, very close together.
Yes.
So is it West Slope versus Front Range, or is there any value in trying to spread the two meetings a little
I
farther
actually
apart?
asked that exact question, and right now, the way we're thinking about it is that they're the same opportunity provided in two different geographical places. But if we decide we want to interpret that differently, that is up for discussion, but that is how we read it.
That is how initially we were interpreting our instructions.
I have a,
Erin,
is there a need to have a whole separate day for public comment? I'm just thinking, right, I don't know if you're envisioning whole day meetings but like.
No, sorry, yes.
Thinking about this meeting as a half day, if we can incorporate, and also, just being a part of conversations, and we can talk about this later, but I just want to bring it up. Being a part of conversations, developing legislation. A number of people wanted seats at this table and weren't able to get a seat at the table because it was promised to them that they would have adequate input into this task force. And I don't know if 2 is adequate input. So that's just coming from my perspective.
Thank you. We were not part of any of these conversations, so anything that you can help to educate us on how we need to be going about that public engagement, what would be the most beneficial to you as members of this task force is helpful. And then, I'm sorry, there was another hand down here and then Andy. What was it?
I'll ask Kristen.
Okay.
Before we move on, I just want to make since you opened this conversation, one of the things that we are considering asking you to do for homework preview is to think about what do we need to understand from the public to I mean, the public should have a voice regardless, but what does this group in particular, how would that best inform your decision making and when should that happen? So that's, something we're pondering.
You know, I guess I would agree with Aaron, just in terms of public task force. Well, these aren't public hearings in the land use sense or a legislative sense, they're public meetings, and I wonder, hopefully within phase 2, we will be identifying subject matter topics for each of those meetings so that we can kind of work logically through a progression that would end in some form of recommendation. To me, reserving a part of each meeting, whether at the end, in the middle, probably not the beginning, for public to comment on that specific topic would be really helpful. I know in the West Slope, we have a whole lot of interested constituents who have a lot of opinions about what this task force may or may not be talking about. They have a lot of thoughts, they have a lot of experience, and they love to participate. And I recognize that doing so would make this meeting longer, but there are ways to get that input. And I just, even reading the Environmental Coalition's letter that came in this morning on email, they are calling for transparency as well. And I think the better, most public, most open process we have, the better off whatever recommendations come out of this will be accepted. So I just would encourage this board to think about doing that kind of openness in terms of public.
As somebody who's been thinking about the time frame of this, I do appreciate your comment about it needing to make the meeting longer. So something to think about, like we also have a lot of substance to move through. So I
but we can't sacrifice public input for our.
No, agreed. I'm just saying if that was something you wanted to, it would have to be an additional time.
All right, Jackie, Aaron, Alex, and then Randy.
I'll just put my voice in for preference of having public comment at each of these meetings and not adding additional time for travel next to a meeting that is to be virtual. I think it's already a lot of pressure on everybody to move things around. And so I don't think that would not be the way I would go. We have to back them up for public meeting. When we're meeting in public, we have this whole morning. It appears that most of us have to leave earlier. Anyway.
Gotcha. And Aaron, and then Alex and Randy.
I agree.
Okay.
Just chiming in, I won't add to it, but I think that's a better way to structure it.
Alex?
Yeah, I just want to understand, Jackie, what you said in terms of, can you just repeat what you said in terms of structuring the meetings?
Sure. I mean, if we're gonna meet, I believe at the last meeting, we said that these would likely be 12 to 3. My preference would be to have public comment at the beginning or end of those. 10 to 12, 3 to 5, whatever that looks like. Or as Andy mentioned, during the meeting or whatever. Rather than, I would rather have more public input along the way at different opportunities than have these 2 meetings with a special, big public comment meeting. I think that doesn't go over great, especially this time of year. A lot of people are really busy to ask them to travel to Grand Junction or here or whatever. And I don't want to travel on a day when we're gonna have a virtual meeting, so. That's a lot of additional stress on the schedule.
Right, so I totally agree with having public input at every meeting. I think it's super helpful. And I also, I'm just, because I'm really focused on like, what is it that we're doing here? I think there's an opportunity for members of the public to digress. And I don't want 2 hours of people, I really appreciated your concern about fear of the future. And I think that's a really important underlying aspect of all of our conversations, whether we're in a group like this, whether we're in our own entities trying to figure out our water futures. There's a lot of fear around the very uncertain future that we all face on a lot of different ways. And I would like to try to help the public focus on what it is that we're trying to do. Once I know what it is we're trying to do, right? So that we don't just become a sounding board for people who want to express various fears about different things that may not be relevant to this, right? So I totally agree with regular public comment, and I'd like to help people be focused on those comments so that their comments are actually helpful to the process.
Randy was next, and then Aaron, and then Steve.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Alex said, and I think having focused outreach and engagement with the public to really channel those energies would be appropriate. I'm just wondering, are the public meetings the only mechanism by which we are going to solicit input from the public? Because I think there's a lot of other avenues that could utilize, obviously.
Absolutely, and just to respond to that quickly, the part of what it is we're also having a comment box on our website that is still under development to make it secure. But that is another way to bring messages in, and then we just send them out to you. So we bring them in, we're checking that. Jordan's checking that, I shouldn't say we. Jordan is checking that multiple times a day. Once we're up and running, and we'll be sending those comments out to everyone. Again, that is not sufficient, we recognize. We also have some constraints, just in terms of budget. So, but we are open to, all that being said, we are open to whatever we can do to bring those public comments in.
Yeah, perhaps, one way to do that would be, rather than just having an open comment box, have very pointed questions, to solicit input on various topics. So that's, very channeled.
I agree with that. And it's similar to what I was saying about the homework and thinking through what information is going to be super useful and actionable by this group. I think that could inform something like that. And I also think with this group being a representative group, I wonder if you all could help with that outreach in terms of reaching out to your various constituencies with, hey, here's your ways to comment, and helping to bring it in that way. That would, be additional tasks on us and our side of the process, but that would help you fulfill your roles as a representative. So just for your consideration. Aaron.
I was also gonna ask about availability of a forum for people to submit written comments, so that's great. And I don't think these two ideas are necessarily mutually exclusive, that especially if we're gonna be providing an opportunity for public in person, if we're in person comment at all or many of the meetings, that maybe one or more of the open meetings to provide just comment on anything. Maybe that could be done online to reduce travel. If we're letting people come in person when we're already in person, maybe that's a way to balance some of Jackie's concerns and all of our concerns, I'm sure, once we start traveling around the state.
Steve, did you?
I guess the only thing I'd add is maybe response to Alex is, if you allow the public comment is good, the more the better. If you allow the public to comment at the end of every meeting, does that keep them focused on the topic that was discussed today? I think it helps. Okay, so, because I agree, public can go on tangents. I think there are ways to focus.
We as a committee could ask, I think the public could request that their comments be limited to the subject.
That's right. We as a committee can go off on tangents. So.
No,
Which I certainly love.
All right, Darius had his hand up and then Kyle.
I guess my biggest deal is this whole thing is not clear to me at all, and I don't see how the public can be clear to the public at all. I guess before we start taking a whole bunch of public input, I would like to be more clear to what our whole process is here today. And another thing is I'm glad we're all sitting in this room talking about these different things, but the thing that gives me the most heartburn is there's a bigger wreck south of us in the lower basin. And before we start making a bunch of plans saying we can do this and we can do that, shouldn't they down there be saying what they can do? It's just my.
I'm gonna ask if there's any more comments on just kind of the general concept of this structure. It is for us as a body to inform this and adjust this and tweak this. So all of the things we're talking about are on the table. We're starting to get into like who we are and why we're here. And that may be that's kind of our next topic. So I want to make sure that we're finishing this before we get to that.
It was Kyle and then I saw Kate, Alex and Jackie all at the same time. And then Andy.
Well, just another vote for allowing public comment at every meeting. But I assume we're going to be moving around the state for these in-person meetings. And I think it's important from a process perspective to allow folks in that area to be able to come in person, because we all know there's certain parts of the population that aren't going to weigh in on the internet. It doesn't matter how we design that. So
yes, right. Just to respond to that, we're looking at, as I said, scheduling the 14th meeting in the Grand Junction, Montrose region, and then the October 12th meeting down in the Durango area. Alex, Jackie, and Kate were all at the same time. So we'll start with Alex and then Jackie and then Kate. I'll be reading.
I just wanted to suggest, and I know a lot of people might not like this, but I would be willing to have more in-person meetings, even if I have to travel. I just think we have better conversations. It's more robust. We get to know each other. I just think it's better to talk about hard things in person than it is online. So I know there's a budget issue as well around that, and maybe that's I know it's unsurmountable, but if it is surmountable, it would be great, I think, to have more of our meetings in person. Well, think about that suggestion.
I think it's a great suggestion. I'm wondering if the legislature doesn't have the money, perhaps there are some organizations around the table supplement the money to make sure we do this.
You know, if that is a consensus of the group and I think we could do a thumbs up or down on that idea, I can certainly go out searching for other funding, and I don't know what you all's time commitment are to.
I think Andy already committed the district to pay.
I heard that. That's what I heard.
We would be happy to contribute some, but I don't think we can contribute all. It would be, and no one would want us to contribute, even you.
Is this on the same topic?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just advocate that if we do that, maybe we should still provide a hybrid option just to make it, yeah, to make sure that it's feasible for some folks that just cannot travel twice a month across the state.
Absolutely. Jackie and then Kate.
Well, my comment might be moot now, but I think the September public comment meetings are too early. I think I totally understand what some of my colleagues at the table are saying, and I would rather get some information that people have something new to react to rather than, you know, at this point, nothing new. So that would be a vote for if we are not going to incorporate some sort of public comment, and if it's the will of the committee to have big events, that they be a little bit later to make them more impactful. And regarding the travel, I think my discomfort with it is not knowing where we're going, how long it's gonna take us to get there, and some of us have families and things that we just have to be a little bit more, little less spontaneous and more planned so that we can make sure that we can, you know, bring our best selves to wherever it is we're going.
Any comments or responses to Jackie? Yeah, Gerald, or is it a response to Jackie or?
Yeah, well, just about the comment period. I personally, I think we ought to have it at the end of every meeting. Limit it to 3 minutes. If they want to have more conversation than that, have them email it to us. Rather than taking up that much time, but if they do have something that needs to be brought forward right after that meeting, I think it'd be better to do it right then. We may not respond to it until the next meeting, but we can at least take their comments right then. And limit them to 3 minutes. And if they need more than that, they can send it to us.
So I'm in support of public comment at each meeting. Flexibility personally and professionally to travel, but recognize the constraints. So however that works for the group. My second comment is going off of the public comment track, just a heads up, but you know, looking at the timeline, December 15th is our hard deadline for submitting a final written report. And so I guess my question is, when can we expect something in writing to start reacting to? And should we start very much building that into this timeline so we know we're not just pontificating for the whole first 6 meetings? Because we have to get something on paper to start reacting to. December 7th would be our final meeting to finalize before next week's deadline. So that really leaves us, I mean, 3 full months, but that's not a lot of room just to kick stuff around. So getting specific, I think is gonna be really critical.
Yeah, I just wanted to second Jackie's comment about the public comments. The 13th is just, you know, literally that means that's the next meeting we do as a public comment meeting. We're still trying to, you know, kick this thing off. I don't see how that's fair to anybody in the process. The additional in-person meetings, while I understand the value of that, you know, I'm still looking at lots of holes on my calendar going, where will we be? When will we be, you know, maybe because for some of us, it's not, oh, okay, I'll get up in the morning and go. It's, I've got to make plans. I've got to make plans for the next day. I've got, you know, other things that both professionally and personally to do. So, you know, until we at least see where we're going to be to begin with, it's hard to say, oh yeah, let's do some more in-persons.
Hear that loud and clear. And just to respond to that, part of this is, it says draft up there, and that's because this is designed to prompt everything that's coming right now. So this is not permanent. And we want this to be a reflection. Our job is to facilitate and make this a reflection of what you all are saying. It's not our ideas about what it should be. Like, that's not what should end up on there, is not what we think, but what you all think and decide as a group. So yeah, thank you, Andy.
Well, that's perfect, Kelsey, because my comment was, can we talk about self-governance and how we make decisions? This is a relatively simple one, our schedule. And do we want to hold the meetings in public and with public comment and in person? And shouldn't we as an entity actually vote on it? It would be ideal to have consensus, right? The statute, I think, does allow for majority decisions, but hopefully we can all agree that we want to try to have consensus on at least the major substantive points. But how do we move forward? Is this a reasonable schedule? If they're in person with a hybrid option for those likely who are concerned about being able to travel? Can we talk about the different areas of the state we want to meet in? And I think Commissioner Greenberg raises a really great question as to how we develop a document throughout the process that turns into a report. And there are just some process questions that I have in terms of how we function as a group. And I think it would be really helpful to all agree on something so that we're not just sitting around espousing. And I think Kelsey pointed out, they're not the decision makers, they're the facilitators. We're supposed to be decision makers here, so we can set our own schedule, we can set how we're going to make decisions, or all that kind of thing. So
Well, let's just jump in and do that then, because I think that's a good comment. And we have the questions I wrote down, do we want to continue with our alternating in-person and virtual meeting schedule, or do we want to move it to all in-person with the hybrid bailout for anybody who can't get there?
With the caveat that we need more funding if we move to more in-person meetings.
Right. How much more funding? What does that look like? Are we talking $10,000 or $100,000?
Somewhere in between that.
is it between 50 and 10 or 50 and 100?
Precise number.
But
It's based on the legislative office's estimates. That's the information that we've been given, so. Kelly has her hand up.
I'll just maybe caution that like moving money from one entity to another for reimbursements and stuff, like, isn't always straightforward, so. I'm not sure, I don't work for the legislature, but I know there could be some tricky
This is
budget
I don't know
stuff
the
there,
answer to.
so. I mean, maybe want to be careful about assuming that is for sure an option.
It's definitely hard with the state involved.
It is tricky with the state involved.
We may be able to pay the group directly and the state covers the mileage expenses or something like that. But I think without getting into the details, if we get a sense of what does this group want to do, then we can follow up after this.
I'm gonna make a suggestion on the process front, because I've facilitated a number of groups like this, and I know there could be a perception on neutrality if we're being paid by different organizations, so I wonder if the thing that we discussed today is there's a desire to look into the feasibility of that, then let's do that rather than assume that we can do it, because our next one is meant to be virtual, right, Kelsey?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could look at, maybe talking about just that one and then looking at funding beyond that. I don't want to get out.
We do have 3 weeks. We've got a little cushion.
A little bit of a gap. So I guess maybe that's the question for the group at the moment, since we don't have more hours.
And I think this is what you were saying, is maybe we get the group to decide if we had the money, would we like to meet in person more regularly? And then whoever is appropriate can go figure out the funding. And the answer might be no, in which case we'll stick with the schedule, but if it's yes, then.
Is that a motion from you?
That's a motion.
All right.
A request for a vote? I don't know what that is.
All right. All right, so we've got, we will just go ahead and do this as, vote.
Can you repeat the motion?
What is on the table for a vote is whether to, if funding is available and logistically possible through the state rules, would we like to meet in person for the following meetings after this one with a hybrid option in case someone or their alternate cannot attend. A no vote would be we continue with the alternating virtual and in-person meetings. Okay. Good questions. All those in favor of in-person if possible.
We'll do it though.
Good. All right. Any opposed? I think that's everyone. Unanimous. Then our next item on the table has to do with public comment, and we've had a couple of suggestions that we take public comment at the end of every meeting. And Gerald, do you want to turn your suggestion into a motion and
I move
vote
that
on
we
that?
take public comment at the end of each meeting and limit the participants to 3 minutes to each one, so that nobody can go off for a long period of time. And let it get our feedback right then over what we discussed that day.
And I would second that. Okay.
Clarify, I'm sorry, can we clarify, if we're gonna have a total time limit, because if our meetings are only 3 hours, and we have an hour of public comment, you know, depending on how many people there, I would think we need a cap on the time.
Yes, I believe we would have to make our meetings longer, to add that hour to the end of the 3-hour meetings.
But I think I hear the request being, we would not to exceed 4 hours or not to exceed 5 or whatever that number would be, is that right?
That public comment would not exceed 1 hour or something.
Right, one addition, like that we would, a total meeting time or total time commitment for you all.
Right.
And another clarifying question, would we still have the bigger farm range West Slope? We're just talking about additional public comment at each meeting.
Yes.
My assumption is that
I
in the
think
statute.
what I'm hearing from the group is that it would replace those, that we would have them each time in lieu of having these standalone events. But and to Randy's point, probably, you know, publicized differently and make sure people are aware of that option.
And you believe that meets the statute?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, that square with the language in there, that there would be the two public. I remember how it's worded.
It's at least 2 opportunities
I would think it's
for
one,
public
but-
comment. So it
Yeah, the language is
it's at
one.
least 2 public opportunities. And so we would actually be more transparent than what we are.
We can add it to our list of clarifications. Make sure that it's it, but it sounds like it.
Yes, I think we can just come forward and say, here's what we're doing.
Jack, this point of discussion, at the end of meetings, people are tired, and then things that get said at the end of a meeting don't have anywhere to go. If we were creating our agendas that folks knew what the topics were ahead of it, my ask would be, would there be consideration for before the meeting begins? So if the topic that day was, you know, impacts to agriculture, I know it's very broad and whatever, but then people could come fresh, give their 2 to 3 minutes, whatever that looks like, and then we can be considering what we've heard throughout the discussion. I find that sometimes you get that loss when everybody's done with the day. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If we were cleaner in our agendas and might encourage more direct feedback that we can incorporate.
Yeah.
And that'll be fine. I just think it would be better to do it every day, every time we have a meeting, not like that.
Well, if that's acceptable to the motion for in the second, then we.
Sorry, Randy had a comment.
Well, I was just gonna build on that and also what Kate had said earlier in that, you know, I'm very concerned with this timeline, as I'm sure everybody's really anxious about it. And I think we need to look at that end goal and maybe outline out what this report is gonna look like and build, you know, sub chapters, if you will, and align our meetings to answer those questions, because I'm really doubtful we'll have a product at the rate we're going with just, you know, coming up with topics every meeting.
It's a fair observation, but I do think that's what our job is today, is to figure out how are we going to proceed and how we're going to tackle that. So that's a good suggestion. So we have before us to take public comment at every meeting. We will do it 1 hour before the task force convenes as with our meeting agenda, and limit folks to 3 minutes of comment, not to exceed an hour total. If there's more than that, then can send it in.
Related to the subject matter of that.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Okay, anybody opposed to that? All right. Look at us, we're making progress.
Progress.
All right, so we have locations, and I think Jackie, your comment and others too, getting that pinned down as quickly as possible will be critical, but that's something we probably do outside of this discussion.
Have real desire to have a meeting in a certain place, should they contact you, Kathy, or the?
Both.
Not just a desire, but if people, I would assume if people have offices or facilities that are available. Like we do in Boulder, I don't know if we need to go to Boulder, but the point being, if there are free spaces we could use, it'd be maybe good to share them with the facilitators.
Yes, a number of you have already, which we really appreciated. It was harder than I thought it would be, getting a meeting room that was large enough in 2 weeks. So thank you for those of you who have shared locations. We are investigating a bunch of them for our future meetings. And so we are, as I said, our plan right now is to be in the Grand Junction Montrose area for the September 14th meeting, to be in the Durango area for the October 12th meeting, and to be in the middle of Colorado somewhere for the November meeting. And then potentially back here for the December meeting. But now if we're going to try to meet in person for every meeting, if that is, since that's the objective you all decided, we will start investigating options for those meetings as well.
But do send your.
You said if you have more, if you have not already sent them in, please do.
You already have a location for the Durango.
We do not have a permanent location. No, we just started reaching out.
Clarify, so like initially our plan was the first meeting of the month was going to be remote, the second was gonna be, it was what, okay.
Yeah.
Can you, on logistics, I have November 9th and 16th held on my
Yes.
calendar. Which one is it? Or we don't know? It's
The 9th would be in, the original plan was 9th in person, 16th virtual, but it's both because of Thanksgiving. And also, I mean, wait, again,
to be determined.
if y'all want to change it, change it. Like, we had to put something out there for you because you're asking us these questions, but honestly, it is a launching board for you to decide.
So you got October 12th in Durango, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So to that end, if we bring back the timeline,
Okay.
is this a good chance to line out to Kate's earlier point, sorry, Commissioner Greenberg's earlier point, that we take a look at like, when we hope to have a draft so that we can start building, I mean, I see on the agenda today that we're, well, I lost it, but we have something today that we were gonna do, establishing common ground and group expectations and outcomes. I mean, maybe that's something that will help us if we're going to say, this, for instance, by November 9th, we want to have the bulk of our, maybe it's not our recommendations yet, but it's all the possibilities that we're thinking about putting out there by such and such date, then maybe we can start to arrange what this is gonna look like for us.
I think what you're suggesting is a great segue into, because what some of the was talking about, what our objectives and things like that. So if it seems like a lot of people from a process perspective really need to see that, how will this progress before we can even get there? So maybe that's a great thing to hang on this framework now.
So I want to just pause and say we have been sitting for a while. Also, the presentation we have lined up next is from Megan McCall with the Office of Legislative Legal Services to talk about open meeting laws, because we got confirmation last week that we are going to be subject to open meeting laws. We're going to be treated as a decision-making body. So we brought her in to kind of explain what that means. And I don't know if that information would be helpful to have before we launch into that conversation. We had scheduled it for after that, but if it would be more helpful sooner, we can take a break and get Megan set up and get that information first. Yes. Anyone opposed? No. Okay, so let's take a 8-minute break and we'll get Megan set up. Are you okay with that? Okay.
Because we're in the second half of the meeting, to make a successful meeting, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I opened my own day. Yeah, they are. This one's peanuts. Yeah, no, did you got?
Yeah, how was this?
They're related.
We're back to
Yes, I got it.
Drought.
Late.
What was that?
Checking to see if we have meeting space on that date.
And I can go for security and make sure that I'm not fairgrounds in Moffett County. So
Yeah.
legit spots. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I know.
Yeah,
like,
it's- yeah, it's probably-
I would introduce myself. I'm here. But I'm happy to. I
Hey, how's it going?
I know we're all. Yeah. I didn't know about it until after. So.
No, I'm.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's why we have.
Well, they.
Well, if you. I don't know if I'm just talking about the, so I should bring to the table. So that's part of the reason I've been coordinating together. I just, you know, make sure we're all communicating. Water, yeah, water, more water. Yeah. Very.
How are you? I do. We have some. So I don't see. Which isn't bad, it's just, it's nice to have. Yeah. If I want to get the grand touch. Get out.
Hi, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go get my cards. You guys.
Yes.
I'm here.
Oh, you're visiting.
That's pretty much all I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'm here, I myself to water. Yeah. Alright.
Okay.
Video, never a person.
No, they also visitor.
And I think it's
I live in Walmart.
Sorry,
But of course, I live on Alameda. Well, not on it, I think just that, it sends you 225. Sure. Activists, that's correct. I don't know if I'm allowed to go for that.
Everyone here is named
Sorry, I didn't run it. Get more caffeine. But it's the right thing to do. It's just-
when you turn into your own.
It's all the list.
Yeah. Yeah, keep going. In fact, he's not. Go for it.
We can do that, I can go. I don't think that is gonna be that. The speakers in here are like. Oh, we talked about this.
She's like, problems. Yeah. It's like basic. You gotta leave, like you get back. Where'd you go?
That's okay. Yeah, I just.
I mean, I'll leave it to construction. Anytime, yeah, and that's fine.
My wife does.
You know, there's. Happy to.
That's right, you have one laptop.
And the people that I know that are texting me are getting off.
To the extent that. I know it.
All right. It was no other context. That's the important part. There was so
Yes.
I think it's gonna be.
Daughter and my son are besties.
Yeah, oh, okay. Very sweet.
You can't see them.
West.
If you go down, like I do have a link.
There's a room over there that says coffee fruit bag, and I don't know. Is it actually their coffee? Okay. No, that was an easy request. I don't think we need to vote on it.
It's coffee.
Oh, coffee be lovely.
Coffee and sugar.
Easy work.
I have.
All right, let's get started.
Just. So.
No, I just have multiple. Oh.
I know, I've had a couple conversations.
We are going to be discussing open meeting laws and how those affect our task force operations. And we are pleased today to have with us Megan McCall. Megan's an attorney with the Office of Legislative Legal Services. So she's got a presentation. If we've got specific clarifying questions for Megan at the end, she can answer those here. If we have lots of complicated questions, she will follow up on those after the meeting so that we can move on.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna be hanging out back in this corner, so, where I'll be. All right, good afternoon. My name is Megan McCall. As mentioned, I am a staff attorney with the Office of Legislative Legal Services. I'm gonna be going over with you today some obligations and considerations concerning transparency to be aware of as task force members. As mentioned, there may be a little bit of time left for questions. If not, then we can follow up in another manner. All right, there are two components to transparency under Colorado law. There's the Colorado Open Meetings Law, which is also referred to as the Colorado Sunshine Law. And there's also the Colorado Open Records Act, which is usually referred to as CORA. It is declared to be a matter of statewide concern and the policy of this state that the formation of public policy is public business and may not be conducted in secret. Since its adoption in 1972 by the voters of Colorado, these words that you see on the screen that are in the declaration of policy that's set out in the Open Meetings Law have remained substantively unchanged. So that's exactly, almost exactly as the voters voted it in 1972. Both state and local public bodies are subject to the Open Meetings Law. This presentation is going to be focused on how the provisions are applicable to state public bodies and how those apply to you as task force members. I've highlighted here the key components to the definition of state public body that are applicable to the task force. In short, the task force is an advisory body to the General Assembly and therefore a state public body and is subject to the Open Meetings Law. The ultimate question for you is whether a meeting you are having must comply with the Open Meetings Law. Does the meeting need to be open to the public? Is notice required? And does there need to be minutes recorded? We'll start by taking a look at what is a meeting in order to know if it has to be open to the public. According to the Open Meetings Law, a meeting is any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business, whether that meeting is in person, by telephone, being held electronically, or by other means of communication. This is a very broad definition. If you are holding a meeting that meets this definition, the next question to ask is the meeting covered by the Open Meetings Law? If it is covered, it needs to be open to the public. So let's talk about what's covered. A meeting, and again, that's going to be any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business in person, by telephone, electronically, or other means of communication. So a meeting that has two or more members of the body present and at which public business is discussed or formal action may be taken is subject to the Open Meetings Law and must be open to the public. Additionally, and relevant specifically for this task force, the legislation enacted that creates the task force, Senate Bill 23-295, expressly states that any meeting of the task force or subtask force must be open to the public. So the definition of meeting includes telephone calls, emails, texts, and can even include social media interactions. Put in context, two or more members meeting in person, a telephone call between two or more members, and an email between two or more members are all considered meetings and must be open. This does not mean that you cannot talk to or email another member,
But what it means is that communication is subject to the open meetings law, and you cannot prohibit the public from listening in on your conversation in person or over the phone, or from being included in the emails between yourself and the other member if so requested. And the bottom line is, you cannot use communicating by telephone, by email, or other electronic means to get around the requirements of the law to prevent open access to the communication. The open meetings law does specifically state that chance meetings or social gatherings at which the discussion of public business is not the central purpose are not subject to the open meetings law. This makes sense when you think about the definition of meeting, which says a meeting is a gathering convened to discuss public business. However, it's worth being mindful of discussions and conversations at chance meetings you have with another task force member, or social gatherings you are at where other task force members are present. And there are consequences to violating the open meetings law, which I'll get into in a few slides. But also the courts have let us know that the open meetings law should be interpreted broadly. This is to ensure that the intent of the law is met, which is for citizens to be given a greater opportunity to become fully informed on issues of public importance, so that meaningful participation in the decision-making process may be achieved. So to recap, a meeting that triggers the open meetings law and must be open to the public is one in which 2 or more members are present in person, over the phone, electronically, or by other means of communication, and either public business is discussed or formal action is or may be taken. Put another way, task force members who are involved in the meeting, no matter how informal, cannot preclude members of the public from accessing or being present for their discussions or communication of public business. There are a few additional requirements for certain meetings of a state public body. The first additional requirement for certain meetings is notice. The open meetings law requires full and timely notice for any meeting at which the adoption of any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action occurs, or at which a majority or quorum of the body is in or is expected to be in attendance. Also, and you'll see at the bottom of the slide, for any meeting of the task force, minutes must be promptly taken, and those records must be open for public inspection. Usually in practice, what this looks like is just posting minutes online, for example, on the General Assembly's website or on the website of the task force. So when it comes to evaluating your actions and the actions of the public body under the open meetings law, the questions to ask are, is it a meeting? Is it a meeting covered by the open meetings law? If so, it needs to be open to the public. And does the meeting require notice to the public? If yes, then prior to the meeting, there must be full and timely notice to the public of the meeting, and minutes must be promptly taken, recorded, and be open to public inspection. I have a few other open meetings law considerations on this slide. The first is that the open meetings law does not specifically require that the public must be able to actively contribute at meetings. However, Senate Bill 23-295, which is now in statute creating the task force, specifies that public testimony must be allowed during at least one meeting of the task force and subtask force. Also, in the requirements of the open meetings law, a meeting requiring that a meeting be open to the public, this applies to audio and video if the meetings are not in person. This means that the public must be able to access the live audio or video of the meeting as it's going on. The open meetings law does provide one exception where a state public body can meet in a closed session for what's called an executive session. This requires a 2/3 vote of its members to vote in favor of an executive session, which must be done in an open meeting and can only be done for certain allowable topics that are expressly stated in statute. I have a few of the allowable topics listed on the slide. It includes discussing the purchase or sale of property, some discussions with attorneys, anything required to be anything required to be kept confidential by law, and security arrangements. While these are instances where the body can go into executive session, while in a closed session, the body cannot adopt any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or otherwise take formal action. That all has to be done in an open meeting. So executive sessions are designed for discussion, but not for any formal action. Also, the courts have let us know that an action that's taken in an open meeting, which has the appearance of merely rubber stamping an action taken or decided to have been taken in the closed session, will be a violation of the open meetings law. As a final consideration, although a meeting can be closed to the public, an electronic recording of the meeting may be required to be made and maintained. Generally, the recording is not open for public inspection, but there are some instances where it could be. If you've been paying attention to the media, will have seen this have played out in the context of a Denver school board meeting, this exact thing. As with most things in life, or at least in law, there are consequences to violating the open meetings law. If a state public body violates the open meetings law, whatever the action was that was taken at the meeting is invalid. As you can imagine, this can have far-reaching implications, in particular in the context of this task force, which only has a limited time to meet and do the work that's been assigned to it. Any citizen of this state has the ability through court action to seek that the provisions of the open meetings law are enforced. And a prevailing citizen is entitled to their costs and reasonable attorney's fees, which are to be paid by the state public body. In a lot of ways, this is the real hammer that's been built into the open meetings law. Also, keep in mind, the threshold for a citizen to bring an open meetings law challenge is broad. Again, the courts have told us that because of the important public interests advanced by open meetings laws, the law should be interpreted most favorably to protect the ultimate beneficiary of these laws, which is the public. It's also worth keeping in mind that a real or perceived failure to comply with the open meetings law is likely to result in public and media scrutiny and even criticism of the state public body's members involved in that meeting. It's always best practice when it's a close call or a question of the law's applicability to have the meeting be open, give notice, and take minutes. Okay. Turning now to the sister topic of the open meetings law, CORA, the Colorado Open Records Act. It is declared to be the public policy of this state that all public records shall be open for inspection by any person at reasonable times except as provided in the Colorado Open Records Act or otherwise specifically provided by law. So the rule is that all public records are open for inspection and all exceptions to the rule have been carved out in CORA, in other areas of statute, and also to some extent in case law. We start as we did with open meetings with a key definition for CORA. Our key definition is public records. Public records are all writings made, maintained, or kept by the state or any agency, institution, or political subdivision of the state for use in the exercise of functions required or authorized by law or administrative rule, or involving the receipt or expenditure of public funds. Again, this is a very broad definition. So what does that mean for you? What documents of yours are considered public records? In the context of your role as members of the task force, only documents relating to the task force are public records. This includes correspondence through email, texting, and messaging in other forms of apps or social media, memos that have been prepared by staff or other agencies, groups, or individuals for the task force, either for individual members or for the whole body, and notes and drafts that you have created and maintain, or that other members or staff have created and you maintain. The key question to ask as to whether you have a document that could be subject to CORA is, does it relate to this task force? Because of that, we recommend not combining personal emails and correspondence with task force emails, correspondence, and other documents. Although task force related documents that you create, keep, or maintain are public records and are subject to KORA, they only need to be produced or otherwise made available by you for inspection if a KORA request is made. And if a KORA request is made for those documents. So what does it look like if a KORA request is made? The first thing to know is the turnaround is very fast. A response is needed within 3 working days, absent extenuating circumstances. Typically, you're going to need to make copies of any responsive records for them to be sent to the requester. The request may be for a very narrow topic, so only some of your task force related documents might be responsive, or it could be extremely broad and most, if not all, of your task force related documents may be responsive. It really just depends. Also, if the document is in a searchable or sortable format, easiest example, an Excel spreadsheet, you might be required to produce it in a format that's also searchable or sortable. What this means is you might not be able to produce an Excel spreadsheet in a hard copy or PDF. Finally, if the record is already available for public access, for instance, meeting minutes that are available online, you can refer the requester there instead of having to produce the document. As mentioned earlier, KORA, other statutes and case law have carved out exceptions to disclosure. This means that you may have a document that relates to the task force and is responsive to the request, but which you may not be required to produce. Whether an exception applies to a document is extremely record specific, and it's something that our office, in responding to a request, determines on a case-by-case basis. Namely, exceptions are for records that can be categorized as work product and records that do not involve the exercise of public functions. There are other carve-outs, but these are the 2 most generally applicable. Also, as an additional catch-all, Senate Bill 23-295 specifies that task force members or governmental entities participating in the task force or sub-task force are not required to provide any information otherwise protected from disclosure. This doesn't have any impact on something that would otherwise be releasable under KORA, but it is an additional layer that has been built into the specific statute on this task force. All that said, in responding to a request, it's likely that all of your responsive documents will need to be reviewed internally to determine if an exception applies. So in that way, they really aren't private. Okay. With respect to your responsibilities as it relates to your records that are related to the task force and in relation to KORA, it's important to know that you are the custodian of those records. The state, the General Assembly, and staff does not have access to or control over the records you create, receive, and retain. That is within your responsibility. So what should you do if you receive a KORA request? Number 1, do not delete or otherwise destroy or discard any records in any form. Number 2, contact the task force administrator immediately. Remember, we only have 3 business days to respond to the request. It's likely that the administrator, probably in coordination with our office, the OLLS, will work with you to evaluate the request and what documents are responsive to it, whether any exemptions apply so that those documents would be either redacted or withheld for one of the enumerated reasons that KORA allows for them not to be disclosed, and ultimately put together a response to the requester in a timely manner. Okay, that's all I have on open meeting law and KORA. Fully recognize that's a lot. That's a lot of information. I want to make one final note. That is that I understand that making sure that your actions are in compliance with the state's transparency laws, it can be stressful and in some ways cumbersome and even inconvenient. But as members of an advisory body to the General Assembly, we do appreciate your thoughtfulness in understanding this information as it relates to your duties throughout the task force's work.
So I'm not entirely sure where we're at on time, but I'll look to Kelsey and see if we have time to
We've
take.
got like a couple of minutes if anybody has any clarifying questions. And one of the questions that had come up is whether this relates to the sub-task force. And I think that you clarified that it does.
Yes, it would relate to the sub-task force.
Any other clarification? Yes.
Who is our task force administrator?
I believe that's Kelsey, or at least whoever you contracted with. Technically, statute is facilitator, or whoever you contracted with, to at least be the central person for communication.
Congratulations.
But I'm gonna do it.
Do we have a place of posting of our notices for this task force?
It is now the website. It was the legislative website. But it is now our website now that it's live.
You're posting those notices and.
Yes.
Perfect.
And they were on the legislative website starting on July 20. I don't want to misspeak. It was at the end of July.
A couple just practical questions. So note taking. Some of us, I'm taking notes about what people are saying. What's the advice on that? Do I just say, well, I'm actually putting my spin on this, it's work product? Or do I say, well, it's actually discussion that's not about a decision that's being made? So, I mean, any advice on that?
My advice is don't put anything in writing that you wouldn't want ultimately publicly disclosed. It's possible that it would fall under work product. It's so case specific that we hesitate as a general rule to put any sort of other guidelines around it. If you have specific questions, we could take a look at something, but it's literally our reviews are document by document, case by case as to whether it would apply. So even giving you a general blanket statement, it might not even work. And for whatever the request is, you never know what a hypothetical request might be. So my general advice is don't put anything in writing that you wouldn't want somebody to ultimately read in the newspaper.
And I guess the second question, just referring to conversations that may have, I was clear that you bump into someone at a conference and the conference is not about the task force. You can have, some conversations there, but I guess is the prohibition as you see it, I saw the reference to 2 or more. Does that come from statute or is that just the definition?
Nope, it's in statute. Yep, 2 or more members of a body. If you are meeting to discuss public business related to the task force, you have now created a meeting underneath the open meetings law. And to the extent anyone is walking by, a member of the press, somebody's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're talking to so-and-so about something about the task force. You cannot say, no, this is a private conversation. It's not a private conversation.
And that was, I guess, the thought, one other mention you had in there, it was like, if requested, it was like, if the public seeks to be part of the meeting, you have to let them do that. But I guess, tell me a little bit more about the contours of that, like, is that would be easy to do, but if you're having a telephone call, I don't see the point that the public can ask to be part of that.
Well, unfortunately, rapidly evolving technology, I think would actually allow that because you can join people onto calls, you can create conference calls, and there's a myriad of other ways that we can do through communication electronically. So I think that if, somebody, and this is like if you are meeting with 2 or more members, but less than a quorum or a majority, because if you're meeting with a quorum or a majority, you're bumped into that next category and that requires notice and minutes, right? So if you're meeting in that other sort of area and you're talking about public business, the requirement isn't that you provide notice like, hey, I'm posting somewhere publicly that I'm gonna call X task force member at X time. That's not necessarily what's required. But if somebody from the public, and I don't know, the most dramatic is always the press. If a reporter hears that you're meeting and they're like, actually, I would like to listen in on that conversation. Again, they don't have to, there's no requirement that they participate, but you can't exclude them from listening in. And so I do think that because of technology, there is the ability to allow people to be joined onto calls, onto video calls, copied or at least BCC'd, probably actually have to copy them because I think a BCC doesn't reply all, on emails, things of that nature. That's a great question.
And this extends to alternates as well, not just task force members.
It would extend to alternates, yes.
Good question. Any other clarifying questions? I presume if you think of things afterwards, let Kelsey or myself know and we will make sure you get them.
Yeah, we'll follow up.
Thank you very much for coming in. And Kathy Kitzman with Aurora Water has very kindly brought us caffeine. So help yourself to that.
Hot water and tea as well. Let me know when it runs dry.
All right, I'm gonna turn it back over to
Yes, you all. This is where we start to earn our paychecks because we have 1 hour remaining and we have a lot to do. So I was gonna cover some, what I'm hearing, we're doing objectives and talking about how this group will function. What I'm hearing from the group, the Willis group, is that we'd really like to nail down how the document will come together and how the meetings, what subjects we want to cover over those meetings. So I've put together a little framework for us to run through. But first I will take my like facilitator moment just to do a little facilitator moment. You all decide how you interact with one another, but what I've observed as good practice when we have big issues that are difficult to tackle, step up, step back is just, I'm sure you've heard this one before. If we are hearing a lot from you, I may ask you to step back or to step back so that someone else can step up so that we're centering all the voices in the room. And we're hearing all the perspectives. Listen with integrity is my way of saying that you're listening with a goal to understand, that you're not listening with a goal to respond. And ask questions with curiosity. So as opposed to with an attacking energy, just make sure you're really seeking to understand someone's perspective as opposed to seeking to oppose it right from the beginning. And I added this one to respect the opportunity based on what you all told me about your hopes and concerns in our last meeting. Is that I think universally I'm hearing people say that this is an opportunity. It may not be the opportunity you envisioned. It may not have the, exact structure you might have put together for yourself, but it is an opportunity to advance. So I think the very best we can do is to respect that this is an opportunity and try and move through the conversations this way. And this is for me, because if somebody's talking on the side, I can't hear. It distracts me so much. So if you can be kind to me and avoid side conversations, that really helps me to continue to focus. Otherwise, all I want to do is listen to what you're talking about. So those are my little preferences. Is there anything that you all have kind of adopted as a ground rule in previous efforts that you think really served the process well that isn't represented here? Or do you disagree with any of these and don't want to conduct ourselves that way? Or are they all pretty easy to go forward on? Okay, great. Then I won't take any more time with that. I just think it's good to sort of talk about how we're going to conduct ourselves. And then this is what I hear everyone asking for. So I wonder if we can get our arms around this as a group. So here are all of our meeting dates and meeting topics and where we will be with document development by that time, or where our goals are to be in developing that document for us over time. So we want to hang subjects, and all this is movable, erasable, it's dry erase board. So start giving me your ideas. So if today, what I've written is, this is group formation, schedule development, objective setting, and kind of learning some of this foundational information that's going to guide our discussion. So in terms of document development, we're going to decide what that should look like and what timeline it should have. So given that, then we're jumping into topics the next time we get together. If the end result is here, where do we start with that in mind? Or feel free to work backwards. If that's the way your brain works, to say if we're finalizing something here, you can also work backwards. So feel free to put something out to me in terms of where you think we should be in either one of these subjects as we go. We can do them individually or together. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, and I don't know if this will be covered this afternoon yet, but work in progress.
Oops.
Did it. I thought my elbow hit something.
Okay.
I think hit on some good language here. It talks about providing additional tools to the board to develop programs. So my first question would be to the board, what are the current tools and what do they think? How do they think the tools may be lacking?
Do we see that as like, we would discuss that in our next meeting?
I would see that as early on because, you know, I'm trying to understand, okay, where's the data gap? I know a lot of people probably have opinions about the data gap, but to me, since we're supposed to be providing tools to the board, it would be helpful to understand the board's perspective on that.
And would you see like a speaker from the board? Someone to come in, like, how would you like to receive that information?
I think that would be helpful.
And maybe if I could just add, like, whether we bring, oh, I'm sorry, did I?
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry, Erin. Yeah, like maybe we could figure out whether it'd be like staff from the Colorado Water Conservation Board or or a board member. And I know we'll get a very brief primer on some of that today, but it'd be too brief, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so we're hearing some of this. So if we do some gap identification and hear on some of that intent from the board, what else would be a logical first step?
Randy, I really appreciated that because I was thinking in a similar way, but maybe a more holistic look at this paragraph 4A that we keep going through. Because in my mind, everything is in there. There's a lot of important sideboards and information built around it. But 4A talks about the program. The programs emanate from tools, out of legislation. And those programs are for drought and for interstate commitments to conservation or demand reduction. And that's just a mouthful, 4A, but if we could distill that into sort of a common understanding of the task force. That, Darius, I appreciated your comments earlier so much because I think you asked, what are we doing? What are we trying to do here? And I think we could, again, turn 4A into sort of a common objectives. And Randy, part of that was, well, so if we want to do these things, we need tools. Where are we lacking in tools? So that would be one component of it. So that's kind of a big charge, but I think that's where we should start from. So
Is that a conversation here or is that information that comes from outside of this room?
I think it's homework for everyone to think about and come back and contribute.
Okay.
Just
because I'm writing up here isn't writing it in stone. We're
Erin.
brainstorming and then we can decide to finalize. We had a voice over here, but yeah.
Erin and then Barton and Kelly.
Okay.
I was going to Randy's question about the current tools, I was gonna ask how much of that we might hear today from Amy and Lauren. It sounds like a snippet and maybe we'll need more. So, and I know Andy's presenting as well, so.
Can I provide just some clarification on what they're presenting, just to make it clear today? I have asked Amy and Andy because they are representatives of the two bodies of literature we have received to share as foundational documents. So I asked them purely for tell us what is in the documents that you have sent. So there shouldn't be any, it's literally just like, there's this document, and this document. Andy, were you gonna respond to that?
No, I was just gonna say, I think this brings up the question of balance here. I think there's a balance between education, which I think is part of what Randy's asking for in actual action and movement. And I think a lot of people around this table have a very good idea of what the tools are already and what the Colorado Water Conservation Board has done and what others have done in this area. And so I'm a little worried that we would spend a lot of time on education. The question I would pose is, we have a great body of work from the CWCB that has been provided, I think 400 and some odd pages. We have some from us. I think there's lots of other work out there. Bart's organization and others have done lots of work. I would hate to see this task force of experts spend a lot of time reviewing what's been done. And in fact, I'm really kind of opposed to that personally.
All right, so we do need to jump back to Bart and Kelly, but I see that there are some responses directly to Andy. Bart, do you want to cede or do you want to speak?
I'll just say that if we end up having, beyond the folks who are already signed up for today, if we have additional speakers, I think it might be useful to have, it might be the folks at this table have done a lease and they could speak from personal experience or something like that. If we don't have that level of detail, then I think in addition to either board members or others, might make sense to have a producer or a municipality who's done some creative thing, join the conversation. I agree with Andy generally. I don't want to have our meetings be 3 hours of presentations. But if they need more, it would be, you know, useful to get practitioners.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I will say from previous experience, a lot of that stuff, the education items, to the extent possible, if we can do homework outside and educate ourselves outside, unless we need an opinion, a clarification, you know, something that must be an in-person thing. If we can do some homework outside, I think it really preserves the time we have together for working time. So that's just what I've observed in previous processes. Sorry, Kelsey, you're tracking the order.
I will wait. I will let whoever wants to respond to Andy and then I'll go.
It was Jackie and Alex.
I think that the Colorado Water Education Foundation has some really great publications that can touch on the current tools that we have, because I think we need to make sure everybody understands the law that we have in Colorado that allows for water sharing. And there are and have been in recent years many more opportunities developed for that if we are looking at demand reduction. And I think that it is a fair point to ask, you know, what are maybe August 31st or September 14th, what are other demand reduction programs, or what are other ideas that exist outside of the demand management space, which is uniquely tied to DCP. And so I would like maybe to draw our focus away from just that body of information. What else is out there? There are other things.
And I guess I'm just gonna say this, for me, highlights my initial question, where I go back to thanking Kevin for what he said about 4A, because I think it's unclear what it is we're supposed to be focusing on. Are we talking about programs? Are we talking about leases and actual demand reduction plans and programs? Or are we talking about tools that the board needs to collaborate with stakeholders to develop the programs, which is what it says to me. And I think those are really different conversations. Maybe we are supposed to do both. I don't know. But I really appreciate not focusing just on demand management in the context of DCP. And there's so much information out there around demand reduction. And, you know, Aurora could we would love to give a presentation on all of our demand reduction programs, which are 26 in number and very effective. So I think this is where I need some clarity, like what is it that we're supposed to be focusing on, given the broad nature and narrow nature of this paragraph, which also includes interstate commitments.
Let's keep going with a couple more comments, and then I have a suggestion on how we can proceed from here.
I don't know where it would fit, but I definitely want to make sure that we are hearing from kind of like a broad spectrum of agricultural producers. Because I think they're really key stakeholder, at least really written, their water is written into this bill. So I think we need to hear, I hate to put the agricultural community all in one box because it's very diverse. So that's why I think we really need to hear from a broad spectrum of producers.
Okay, so I'm just making a note here that we should solicit ag producers to inform our decision making, whatever that may look like.
And I know we have, you know,
that could be
great representation here, but I think even more so that great for this group to hear.
Okay.
And that be something that would be really helpful for you all, since you are the representatives, to reach out to the people that you know that you want to make sure show up, or that you think have a perspective.
Yeah. Agreed. Is that the end of our group of speakers who had already been in line?
Yes.
Okay, so we are deep in a rabbit hole here, and we can go deeper. I mean, we can go, if that is the will of the group, we can keep trying to parse these, but it feels like all the answers aren't in the room right now. So I'm going to encourage us to take one step back, zoom out one tiny little bit, so that we can hang a framework here that, because if we keep going at this level, I don't know that we're going to get there and still have time for our speakers. So I'm thinking in terms of broad topics. So if I was to reframe this as a broad topic, I mean, identifying gaps and understanding current tools, or maybe even current programs that exist, and looking at, you know, subjects that are outside of that. You know, the breadth of things that we want to consider as a group, and talk about those. And then in terms of document development for that, well, you know, I'm gonna hold off on that for a second. So if we spend that next meeting talking about that gap identification, what is the next logical subject? Once we, assuming we do a great job, we understand all of those gaps, when we leave that meeting next time, it's all perfectly clear. When we talk about the future, it's great to assume that that'll be true. When we do that, then what is our next logical step as a group? If we cover that, what's the next subject that is logical to you all? Broadly.
If I could suggest, I think from conversations I had when this bill was going through and before and after, there's a lot of discussion about the timing of implementation of any programmatic water conservation within our state aimed at interstate commitments. And I think this body is appropriate to discuss and advise the legislature on the timing of the implementation of those bills. And I would think that that's even before we might come up with tools for their programs. It's when is it appropriate for the state of Colorado to implement these programs? And why is that timing appropriate?
Implementation timing, go ahead.
Maybe if I could just layer on to that, it's like what would drive that timing would be really good, I think, for the whole group to understand. Yeah, you know, particularly given the state of interstate negotiations, so we could always bring in our commissioner.
Okay.
If we need to.
All right, so we've got implementation timing. What else would be, go ahead.
I'm gonna add to that because Andy, I appreciate that. Maybe helps me put a fine point on what I said before. I think there's a sequence here. And before we can identify gaps, I think we need to know gaps to do what. And so if we do start almost in reverse, I would go to paragraph 4A. If we want demand reduction and conservation, and how are we going to do that? Then, and certainly the timing with which that's appropriate. But once we've identified those, then do we have the tools already or are there gaps? And then continuing up and back in order, that's the legislation that this task force recommends. So again, that holistic look at paragraph 4A, maybe in reverse order, starting with what demand reduction projects and conservation is helpful.
So I'm trying to process what you said into something I can write.
I
So
don't
just,
blame you.
if I think what I'm hearing you say is that we would need to understand what currently exists within each of those categories and and then which direction we want to go. Do we want to stick with those or do different ones?
Yeah, I'm not saying, well, someone else take a shot at it if
It's
you want, but
What's the trigger?
Well,
You know,
there's two pieces. There's sort of the in-state desire, need to do something, and an interstate obligation that may happen. Right, we're trying to split those two pieces
Yeah.
apart.
and what are those things? What comes to your mind right now that, don't write this down, but is it leases, you know, fouling projects? Is it shepherding water? Please, just I'm using examples. If
This is a list that
yeah. Non-voting advisor. But if that's what we want to do to address interstate commitments of drought, okay, then where are the gaps in the current tools?
So
Is that all right?
is this then to establish a focus of the group? To say, do we want to spend our time doing in-state needs or interstate obligations and to what level we want to address each one of these?
Yeah.
And sequence.
And, okay, all right, so I may suggest that probably that would move up here.
All right, Kate and then Bart and then Steve.
Couple points, Kevin, I think it's a great point, and I was seeing it as maybe a flow chart. I don't know how we want to arrange that, but it might help with decision making on the August 31st meeting. To get to my second point, which is, do we need to decide what's not on the table at a certain point in order to focus ourselves? Which leads to a third point is, might we consider another framework for how we do business, something relating to simplicity or the fewest number of steps needed to achieve whatever it is this body decides we're here to achieve. To know that we're not here to overhaul the law of the river, right? I mean, I think we can like take some pretty low hanging fruit off the table in order to allow for a pretty clear focus of what we've been set up to do. And I wonder if those three things, kind of building on what Kevin said, might not be good for our next meeting to dive into, to kind of put more sideboards on this body.
So if I can simplify what you're saying, then if from a process perspective, it'd be like at the 31st, we would get big, put all the ideas and all the thoughts and kind of debate how we then get small at the next meeting to say, here's all the things we could focus on, but maybe our time is best spent with this more simplified list and then proceed from there so that we can aim to accomplish something meaningful in the short time frame.
I'm actually hearing something different.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
shaking your head, yes, but tell me what.
Yeah, no, I think Kevin's point of the in-state needs versus the interstate obligations kind of going up front, right? And then I think maybe to Kate's point, sorry, Commissioner Greenberg's point, we could also say, so like, what's not on our table, right? And then the next step might be this, what tools are available that achieve the in-state needs and the interstate obligations, and what tools are not available or are not there, because we have the water plan, we have other programs, other law, you know, that we can look at and say, okay, those things are covered. Well, what isn't covered? And what can we not touch as a group? And what can we touch is what I'm hearing you say.
So the
right?
progression then is the deciding between those in or looking at our focus on the in-state and interstate. Then kind of just looking at what is and isn't on the table and then doing that gap identification. That's the progression you just outlined.
That's what I'd like. What tools achieve those two things, and state needs, interstate obligations?
Okay.
That discussion leads us to what can we talk about, what isn't in our purview, right? Because there are gonna be things we can't.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, one, I think I like this structure. I just wanna, when I think of in-state needs and interstate needs, it's a Venn diagram. I agree that it makes sense because there are some things that we might do just for in-state drought, and there are some things we might do just because we may or may not have interstate commitments. I know there's a question about the terminology, but I just don't want us to unintentionally characterize interstate commitments as not also meeting in-state needs. There's a lot of ways that those are, we are meeting these because they benefit Colorado for various reasons, and we can meet them in ways that benefit water users. So yes, I agree, it's important to break them out, but I don't want them to be completely separate.
But not to the exclusion of that little Venn
Yeah,
diagram center.
Whatever shape.
Okay,
that
the
is.
overlap area. Okay, part next.
Yeah, just, I think all of these important meeting topics are really good for the next couple meetings. I'll just flag for sometime in late October. There's the whole 4B, which some of them just look like they're sideboards to the work we're doing here, but some are like evaluating sources of revenue or something. And maybe this is not even gonna work because maybe the state's working groups that convened 3 years ago already did a good job of this. But at least somebody would need to pluck out
Yes.
some of this material from other places.
These are some of these things that I've written in this little sweet little bubble in the corner here, were the things that we don't know where the sub-task force is gonna be in this timeframe just yet, or when that would be appropriate, when the report to the commission, when the timing is gonna make sense. I'm saying that as maybe potential subgroups, but maybe it's with the whole thing is to figure out those, the funding, like all those detailed requirements that feel big for this timeframe. So, yes, and how do you suggest we handle?
Yeah, and this is a question I've got for the group, and I think for our facilitators is, as we start like putting ideas on paper, is that something, because of the open record presentation we saw, is that like one of us working with facilitator? Or is there a possibility of having a small subgroup of 4 people, they get together and they draft up, they're starting to think around this issue. Some of it we can do here, but group drafting, 17 people at the table, writing paragraphs, that's not gonna be a good use of our time. So we have to, I think we have to figure out a way to.
Yes, let's see if I understood what I heard from both Kelsey and our open meetings presenter, but I believe we have the ability to do that as long as those things do not take place in an overlapping time frame and are open to the public, right?
Yes.
And if we can handle it.
I spent a long time on the phone with Megan in the last like 5 days. She's my new best friend. So we can have smaller group meetings, but they cannot, like right now, we could not have breakout session. Well, we can, but we are advised not to have breakout sessions right now. Because that would inhibit access. Someone couldn't listen to all of us at the same time, and we don't have the technology to like mic that in well. But we can stack small group meetings. So we could have a small group meet from 1 to 2, and then a small group meet from 2 to 3. Nobody else can meet at those times.
Well, there's also nothing that says you can't meet with a group of environmental organizations who are not task force members to come up with some proposals that then you can bring to the group. You can always send your work to the facilitator. They can send it out to everyone else in the task force. So you're not communicating, but it's a communication from
So
staff.
we're not precluded from doing any of those things. We just have to be thoughtful about who and how and when and on what topics we need people to be developing things outside of this work together. Certainly that will need to happen in some form to get it to meet that December deadline. Andy, I think I saw you wanting to say something.
I'm not comfortable with that, actually. I think that we have X amount of meetings in a short time frame, and we have to decide as a group what our product is, and if that is gonna be a 45-page volume of all of the things that have been offered to us, that's one thing, but I mean, or we can tighten this up and decide that our recommendations are gonna be simple, and they're gonna be clear, and they're, you know, they're gonna include all these minutes, but I don't love this going into subgroups. I feel like that is not why we're here, and it's trying to produce an outcome in a short period of time that we're not all gonna be bought into. I mean, I totally appreciate the task force that the sub-task force we already have, and I understand the reasons why we have it. But putting more in environmental and agriculture, like I don't know why we would do that. That seems.
I hear you, Jackie, and I don't want to speak for Robert. I'm not sure that's what he's recommending. I think, like, let's just say this group comes up with an idea of a recommendation. And rather than having 17 people draft a 2-paragraph document or a 3-paragraph document that provides words to the recommendation of this group, we say, hey, are there 4 or 5 people who want to get together between now and our next meeting and write it, and you'd have to allow that meeting to be open to the public, but it's not a quorum, so they can't make a decision. That actually notice doesn't have to be posted, but to the extent that people want to participate, you have some people who put pen to paper and they bring it as a recommendation, and it's not environmental, it's not agricultural, it's representatives of the group, whomever, you know, wants to participate. I do dread, and quite frankly, the idea of a group drafting session in 17 people. Way too many lawyers in this group. And so how do we get that done? Because I don't think the nuance in the language, it's not fair to ask our facilitators to draft that language. Again, this group is the experts. That's why we got appointed allegedly. So then let's try to utilize that. And so I actually tend to agree with Bart, but I don't know if that helps you at all. Maybe you still don't
I
like.
have discomfort with a bunch of attorneys getting together and drafting without me being able to be there, because I only, you know, like there's some of us that can dedicate unlimited time to this, and there's some of us that can't. So what we do and how we say it, in my opinion, needs to be worked out at this table, so we all understand why that language is the way it is.
Okay, so we are running up against a time challenge. So I wanted to do like a 2-minute speed round on, and then Kelsey and I will take these and try and further hang them on this framework for the group to say, what if we proceed this way? So if we start kind of developing that focus to make sure we can be in sharp focus, we talk about what isn't on the table, and then we proceed to kind of identify those gaps. What else do we want to put on this list, even if it's not in order? 2 minutes. Just throw things out and we will try and put some organization and thought to it. Go ahead, Kelsey.
I just want to add, both Amy and Andy are going to talk about some of these things that might be topics that we want to cover.
Okay. So anything else that is just burning?
Hear what they have to say.
Yeah. Yes. Does anybody have anything else burning that I haven't written up here that you're just gonna not be able to listen because you haven't said it? Okay. Then let us proceed.
Sorry, Amy, to like throw the spotlight on you.
All right.
Come around here to our presentation spot, okay, where the camera can see you. Your mic screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I should have given, I believe I gave you permission, so.
Okay, cool.
Aurora, the Denver plant.
Yeah, I know, we need to get our own like cup.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
All right. All right, hi everyone, my name is Amy Ostick and I know a lot of you, but for those of you I don't know, I work for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And my primary job there is supporting Pkwy as the state commissioner on interstate Colorado River issues. I apologize on behalf of our board for sending you 399 pages of materials, but I think it's indicative of the fact that our board has really put a lot of thought and effort into this topic. And I'm going to try really hard to condense that into 10 minutes. But before I get into that, I think it's really important that we start with a clear definition of what demand management is. It's a term of art. It is defined in the Demand Management Storage Agreement, which is part of the Upper Basin DCP of 2019, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. And it contemplates the idea of the Upper Basin states setting up a program of temporary voluntary compensated reductions of consumptive use to ensure ongoing compliance with the Colorado River Compact. One important note that I want to make here is that this is federal law. So the DCP was agreed to by the Upper Division states, it became federal law. And the reason for that is that the way that the system is managed, it is done pursuant to the 07 guidelines, which you may have heard about before. Many of you I know are very familiar with them. But they call for the coordinated operations of Powell and Mead, which means that when there's extra water in Powell, that likely means it might flow downstream to Lake Mead. So what the Demand Management Storage Agreement does is it gives the Upper Basin states the ability to, if they want to, conserve water and store it in Lake Powell and have that not flow down to the Lower Basin states. And the only way that this water could be released from Powell is if the Upper Division states through the Upper Colorado River Commission give the direction to release the water to ensure ongoing compliance with the Colorado River Compact. That's the only permitted use under federal law for that water. And it's important to note here as well that the Upper Division states are in full compliance with the compact. We're using 3 to 4 million acre feet less than our 7.5 million acre foot apportionment. And I know what many of you are thinking, which is that, well, the Colorado River Basin does not have that much water in it anymore. That's a very fair thing to point out. But what I would like to point out is that the spirit of the compact, and again, this is all about compact compliance, right? So talking about what the compact requires and what we get under the compact is key to understanding demand management. The compact envisions equal uses for the upper and lower basins. So the reality is that it hasn't actually played out very well for us. The upper basin states use significantly less than the lower basin states. This is shown relative to our 7.5 million acre foot apportionments. But the point I want to make here is that we're using not only well less than our 7.5 billion acre foot apportionment, but well less than half of the river, which is what the compact really envisions, and far less than our lower basin counterparts. So I have been of the impression that to understand the solutions to a problem, you have to understand what the problem is itself to know how to actually resolve it. So that's kind of why I think that this is a critically important piece of this puzzle. So to go back to demand management, because this implicates our compact obligation, it's important to understand a few things about that compact obligation. It's shared by all the upper division states. It's a joint and several obligation for the lawyers in the room. That means Colorado can't meet it alone. It's not an obligation that Colorado holds. You know, in some of our other compacts, as I'm sure Kevin will talk about, maybe not today, but You know, we have delivery obligations at a state line in some cases, right? That Colorado has on its own. That is not the case in the Colorado Basin. We have a joint and several obligation with 3 other states, and it's met way downstream in Arizona. So when we're talking about how we're going to meet any interstate obligations we have under the Colorado River Compact, it is critical to coordinate with the other upper division states in terms of what that means, what compliance means, and also how we're actually going to meet that obligation. I also want to emphasize the storage agreement set up a feasibility investigation. It didn't say we have to do this. It didn't say how we have to do it. It just guided us to consider whether this would be a feasible and advisable tool for the upper division states. I also want to be very clear that the 07 guidelines, which govern operations in Alameda, which call for water to be released from Powell and there's extra water in it, as well as the demand management storage agreement, all that expires at the end of 2025. And we get to set up new rules for how the reservoirs operate, which is what we're really, really focused on in the state right now.
Maybe
So-
I'm gonna interrupt you a minute. I think what we were hoping for is that you would say, here's the packet we got from CWCB and here are the things that are in it.
You will find a lot of information about all of this in that packet. This is kind of just going over the framework for what is in the packet. There's also a lot of legal analysis on these issues in the packet. So it is this, you will see all of it in the 399 pages. I also want to be clear about what the requirements are under the storage agreement. The very first step is making a feasibility determination. All the upper division states would have to agree on a number of issues, and then we'd actually have to develop the program, consult with the lower basin states, reach agreement with the Secretary of Interior, and do a whole lot of other things before a program could be established. So this brings us to the CWCB's work that is detailed in the packet that you got. The CWCB has been looking at this issue since 2019, but I just want to be very clear that we haven't done it alone. We've gotten a lot of input and feedback from a lot of folks across the state, many of whom are sitting in this room today. So a lot of input has gone into this, and this is kind of a very high level overview of how that has progressed. So it started with a look at really broad, big picture questions. We formed a number of work groups, and many of the work group members, again, are sitting in the room today. But there were 8 or 9 work groups comprised of, I think, 10 to 15 people. And a lot of the documents you see in that packet are analyzing the issues I'm talking about today, and some of them are even authored by some of the task force members here today. So just wanted to point that out. In July, we put out a big report, just kind of over an overview of all that information gathered in that first step. This led our board to develop a demand management framework, which outlines kind of like a tool for discussion is what I would call it. Looking at various implementation options for various parts of a demand management program, and what would that actually look like? So it's kind of a tool to look at trade-offs that might exist in a potential demand management program. That is included in your packet, as well as all the public input we got on that framework. And what that ultimately led to was our board saying, we need a way to organize this information and the questions associated with what a demand management program could look like. These are some of the key findings you'll see sprinkled throughout all those pages. The first one is just really critical that any program would involve temporary voluntary compensated reductions in consumptive use. It's a priority. If a program would move forward to avoid the permanent dry up of agricultural lands, a big part of the discussion was how a program would be proportional and equitable. And what you'll find is that there are a lot of different definitions of that. It's a really nuanced issue. But for a lot of people, what that meant and what the spirit of that is minimizing adverse impacts, whether that's on the farm or off the farm, making sure that we're not creating more problems than we're solving. Non-injury to water rights holders, and appropriate timing, all these things are issues that these work groups wrestled with. So this is another thing you'll see in your packet, the decision-making roadmap, and what this really, the goal of this, I think, for our board was, hey, there's a lot of information here, and there are also a lot of different types of questions, right? There are technical questions. Is it possible to track the water, for example? Is it possible to track environmental benefits. What tools do we have available to look at how we can maximize benefits of a program? Is it possible to develop an appropriate education and outreach program for something of this scale? So those are in our board's decision-making roadmap, we call them achievability questions. Can we do this? Like, can we actually set this type of thing up? And then there's the question of, is it worthwhile? There are a lot of questions about secondary impacts, adverse impacts. There are also anti-speculation concerns, which were discussed by another task force. So even if we can do it, even if we can create the type of program that can achieve these things, does it make sense to do it in light of those policy considerations? And finally, advisability. How does this align with broader Colorado River strategies and goals? And how does this align with the state's position with respect to the other states? And we thought that there are a lot of big questions there, and there's a lot we've learned just in that third box over the last year. So this is my final slide, and I just wanted to highlight that demand management, as is contemplated in the storage agreement, is only one tool, and it's a limited tool. That water can only be used for a specific purpose by the UCRC. So what else are we doing? We get this question all the time. Well, if not demand management, then what? And I just wanted to highlight some other areas that we have actively worked on, things that we've contributed. The drought response operations agreement, we sent 624,000 acre feet of water from Flaming Gorge to Blue Mesa, 18% of our 2021 uses in the upper basin. We implemented the system conservation pilot program, also temporary voluntary compensated reductions in consumptive use. Frankly, I think that showed that there's not a lot of water to be squeezed out of a turnip in certain situations. It didn't produce a lot of water in the year that it was implemented. There are also 4 previous years that was implemented, but I won't go into that.
That's all the states.
That's all the states. In Colorado, it was 2,700 acre feet in 2022 to 2023. So that's a good clarification. The middle point is the one that I like to keep making, because our position in the upper basin has consistently been that if we want to save the Colorado River system, it's very simple. We have to live within the means of what Mother Nature provides. And we do that in Colorado and in the upper basin by administering water rights, strict priority administration. So, you know, I think when thinking about the potential tools that could be available, thinking through, you know, what is the reality that our water users are living in now, which you all are very aware of, and what does that mean for the suite of potential opportunities, potential conservation opportunities? I think that's an important part of the discussion. And also, I think Karen alluded to the actions in the water plan, turf replacement program, just other state conservation programs that we're working on. And then finally, I just also want to emphasize, you know, the upper basin states continue to use significantly less than our compact report. We are in full compliance with the compact. We have a non-depletion obligation, not a delivery obligation. I will say that to anyone who will listen. And we are well in compliance with that. So I think it's important at this point, from a state perspective, we're really trying to focus on the post-2026 negotiations. We're trying to get a better deal for Alameda than what we have right now. And that is really our primary focus. And to take it back to the beginning, the way that, you know, any conservation program is designed, as you've seen with demand management, the discussion. If we're trying to get water to Powell, then the operations at Powell are a critical component of that, right? The way that the reservoirs are managed will impact how and when and whether we want to send water to that reservoir. So we think that developing a good set of guidelines post 2026 is a critical component of making sense of the rest of all this. And part of that is getting lower basin overuse into control, frankly. I've heard it said in this room once, I heard many of you here say that that has to be the first step before we do anything else. And I will just leave it there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Amy, can you describe what our interstate commitments are?
Absolutely. So our interstate commitment is really, it comes from the 1922 Colorado River Compact. And there are 2 key provisions of that. I don't want to step on Kevin's toes too much, but
Step away.
one is a non-depletion obligation, 75 million acre feet at Lee's Ferry over 10 years, non-depletion obligation. What that means is that Even if we're getting close to that, you would look at an inquiry into what's causing that. The other part of the compact is that we get equal shares of the river as the lower basin. So as long as we're using 3 to 4 million acre feet less than our apportionment, and as long as we're using less than half of the river, and as long as the lower basin states are using 10 million acre feet, as we're using 3.5 to 4.5, I think we have a pretty good argument that we're not missing any of our obligations. And I also want to clarify, that's not a state line obligation. It's a joint and several obligation among the agricultural states.
Can you clarify, the 10 million also includes Mexico, correct? So the, just.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's a really good point. So the 10 million includes Mexico. It does not include evaporate. No, it doesn't include, I'm sorry, tributaries.
Right, it doesn't include lower basin tributaries, which is perhaps, from our perspective, is that other million acre they're given. And, but the 10 million number on your slide or close to that.
Yeah.
Does include 1.5 million that's been going to Mexico that is theirs under the tree.
That's a very good point. And we have a lot of arguments that I can make about the treaty.
I understand, no,
And how that should be, obligation should be met, and I won't get into that, but
Just put a little chopping block right here.
Mhm.
I know we have more questions. This session is not designed to answer those questions. This is to understand what is in the information that we have from the CWCD. Also, your slide show is still sharing.
Okay,
So I
you're gonna close it. I'm sorry.
Now that you're intentionally blocking me from sharing mine.
Oh, it's okay. Stop, has it? It just really likes the slide.
The record, it was not responding. May the record show.
May the record.
Right, to let you in now.
And her Zoom has frozen. I can just turn it off. She broke this. Like, that's not on the record. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Good. Okay. We're just gonna exit that.
Well, I think Amy, that was a great presentation by Amy. Thank you. The Colorado River District has put together several works that we provided to this task force and are available on the SharePoint site. Many of these works we did with other partners who are present in this room. The Water Bank Work Group work took place between 2009 and 2020. The only work from that group that we put on this website is actually the secondary economic risk study, which was finalized in 2020. There is a whole lot of additional work that body did. I'd have to dig it out, and if people are interested, I certainly can. I think we had a website in Techie. I don't know if you know if that website's still working, or I honestly don't. The secondary economic risk study, as I said, was done, and that really looked at the potential economic impact of and at the time we were using the phrase demand management program. But to be clear, from our perspective, the intrastate impacts of a systematic water conservation program that pays people to reduce their consumptive use, whether it's SCPP, system conservation, or demand management, those economic impacts are potentially very similar, depending on how many years and depending on the scope of the programs. They're paying people to reduce their use of water and potentially their economic output associated with the use of that water. Again, and then we've done 4 different Colorado River risk studies with partners throughout Colorado, and we'll talk about that real quickly on the slide. And then we did a demand management stakeholder report, and this was a stakeholder process that we went through with stakeholders from throughout our district, both throughout different user sectors and different geographies or different basins. And then our board had staff put together a conceptual market framework, which, sorry, that was me. A conceptual market framework, which some people would call a straw man or straw person. We called it a punching bag because we expected it just to throw ideas out there to see whether we could figure out ways in which a market for a systematic water conservation program would work for our constituents within the river district. Just to go through those real in a little bit more detail, the Upper Basin Demand Management Economic Impact Study. Again, that water bank work group and the organizations that were part of that water bank work group are listed on the bottom left there. And I think the key takeaways, without a well-defined, well-thought-out evaluation of possible options ahead of time, if we are to approach a compact compliance situation, West Slope agriculture would be subject to buy and dry transactions. The report gets into that more if you're interested. Payments, 60 to 90% of payments that go to local owner operators would stay in a community, whereas our economists say that approximately 100% of payments to out-of-state owners or speculators will leave the state and therefore damage the economy within the state. West Slope agriculture cannot carry the burden alone. Just looking at the volume that would be needed, it would need to be temporary, voluntary, and compensated. Limiting the frequency and duration of participation in any program is really important, because you otherwise are setting up an irrigated land retirement program. And then there are additional economic impacts to tourism, wildlife, endangered species compliance that were not studied in this economic report that would need to be looked at. If I can turn to the risk study, again, there are 4 phases of this risk study. They were funded by different bodies, different partnerships, I should say, over the years. The 4th one just came out, was funded by the River District and the Bureau of Reclamation. There were a grant we received. It is an evolving body of work, so keep in mind that as model precision, that with the risk studies use both state mod and the CRSS. Both of those models have gone through some evolution since we started. So the most recent study, the phase 4, that's on the website is the best information we have today. Not to say that it's the final statement. The other thing that is really important to understand is that the risks to our state with respect to compact compliance are entirely dependent on hydrology. And when I say hydrology, it's really the right now under the 07 guidelines. It has a lot to do with the levels of the reservoir and how much water the lower basin is using. So and it's something to keep in mind there. I think one thing that these risk studies got into is that the recognition that post-compact depletions are the only thing that can drive a compact curtailment, if such a thing is ever to occur. Our prior perfected uses are protected under the compact, so our pre-compact water rights. There are the volume of water under our pre-compact water rights. In our state, best estimate from the data we were able to see is that we have about a 2.3 to 2.5 million acre feet of average annual consumptive use in our state, approximately 1 million acre feet of which is post-compact. However, that does vary significantly annually, depending on hydrology. Risk to critical levels at Lake Powell is primarily driven by hydrology, not upper basin consumption. But increasing upper basin demands increases the risk and volume of curtailment if that's ever needed. You talk about a river that what's the average annual flow in a river over a 10-year period. If you have a 13 million acre foot Colorado River, it is sustainable only if the overuse in the lower basin is eliminated. If we have a future where we have significantly worse hydrology, so an 11 million acre foot river, it will require significant additional water cuts even beyond the lower basin overuse. And that's I think important for this group to understand that it is not just the lower basin overuse if the river continues to decline. Maintaining Powell elevation of 3,500 feet, which is something the Bureau stated as a goal under its recent draft SEIS. Under the existing operational policy and continued verification, so under the 2007 guidelines as they're written, puts the entire burden of risk on the upper basin. So that's from our perspective, unacceptable. Our demand management stakeholder group was a report from 16 stakeholders representing interests from across our boundaries. It explored the impact of the demand management program, but I do want to say again, demand management and system conservation are very similar in terms of their impacts within our district and within our state. There's a strong preference for compensated reductions rather than waiting for mandatory curtailment from our water users. All sectors, that wasn't unanimous, but it was a strong preference. All sectors of water use must participate in a program if it is going to be deemed to be equitable. There is a profound fear among our constituents that West Slope Ag will be sacrificed for Front Range or Lower Basin success. And there's also a desire that programs be run locally or regionally. And the report gets into those issues. Simple, clear market rules and protections are needed. The more complex you get, the harder it is for participants to understand it, and the greater the opposition to such a program. Options other than full fallow must be permitted in order to avoid permanent loss of ag, soil health, and the communities that depend on agriculture. The demand management conceptual market work, the punching bag. Want to be real clear, our board has never taken a vote to support demand management or system conservation, or our board has not advocated for that. And these markets are markets set up by government, funded at least in part, if not entirely, by taxpayer dollars to meet a collective government obligation. It is, in its very essence, is not and never will be a free market. Restrictions designed to protect the communities and mitigate adverse impact are appropriate from our board's perspective. Our board would insist that such a program be voluntary, temporary, and compensated, similar to the statutory language we have empowering us here. That non-injury to vested water rights is absolutely critical. And that, again, want to be clear, applies to any kind of program, whether it's system conservation, demand management, or whatever else you want to call it. Our board expressed a preference for a single buyer, meaning not multiple buyers in the marketplace, not allowing different water users to come out and buy water, but to have a single buyer in, whether it's regionally or locally, all part of the same program statewide. Really not looking for competitive buying programs and protection. That program would need to offer protection from non-use and abandonment of water rights. No interstate water marketing, so we're not doing this to get paid by Central Arizona Project and have the water shipped down to them. That's not acceptable to our board. And this is the one that we probably need to get into because I think it offends a lot of people and may be misinterpreted. So at some point substantively should talk about no additional trans mountain diversions if we're having programs like this, or if we're entertaining them. But I recognize that makes the hair on the back of some people's neck stand up. So we should talk what we're talking about at some point substantively. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I encourage everybody to read them. And if you have questions, talk to me. They're not perfect. None of those documents.
I didn't want to make these.
They're on the SharePoint.
Yeah, we're gonna.
I know some of you are having issues accessing SharePoint, and I have sent your emails on to our IT department, and so they will hopefully be reaching out for those of you that are having issues. If you haven't gotten on there yet, please do try.
I'm happy to email those documents out to everybody.
You can email them out, but also I want to be very clear. The only reason we're talking about these documents is because these are the only ones we have received when we ask for foundational documents. So if you have documents or you know others who do that you believe are foundational to this conversation, do please send them in so that we can share them with all of you and with the public. This is, I want to make very clear, this is us passing along information that is considered to be foundational, not a assignment from any in particular perspective.
I appreciate your mentioning the word assignment. Should we talk about what we're doing between meetings?
I just had one quick question. I was able to access it, but I didn't try and post anything. Is your preference, if we have, I don't have anything in mind, but if we have documents that we think would be appropriate, should we just upload them or should we send them to your team so you can kind of collect it?
You don't need to be your filter.
Okay.
As long as, you know, it's not offensive, appropriate, like all of those things that we're not, you know, sharing here. Yes,
Okay,
that you would feel good about the universe seeing. And
So we have something.
just uploaded and
And then we will facilitate it getting onto the website so
Great,
the public
okay,
has
thank
access to it as well. Kyle?
Well, this to piggyback on something Jackie said earlier that's on our list. You know, there's lots of other tools out there. A lot of the demand management work groups talked about some of the ATMs, some of the options already out there. I think everybody in this room who works for a irrigation district, a big system, we have programs internal that are also tools. Does this group want these kind of presentations at every meeting of things that we're doing in our systems that are already allowed under state statute?
I would say, based on the conversation that I've heard so far, is that we're not interested in presentations per se, unless they're determined to be foundational, but that you could be a subject matter expert in those should they come up. Does that feel like it captures the spirit of what was discussed, or does anybody disagree with that? Go ahead.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to hear, you know, what those savings look like over time, like maybe if there's some general facts from, you know, Aurora or from Northern, like over this time, we utilize these few specific programs and our water reduction, our demands from here, you know, from whatever year were this, now they're this, and here's why, right? I mean, I would like to see that, but I understand not filling this task force with presentations. So if there's a way to share some of that without tombs of information, I don't know, that's just my opinion though.
Well, one of the charges of this is to help the state deal with drought.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what all these programs that are in so many systems that aren't shared throughout the state. I think there's a lot of value in helping the legislature understand what are some of the options that are already developed that are working very well. Because in the end, paying somebody not to irrigate during drought doesn't necessarily help the next person. There's not a whole lot we can do in that scenario, other than some of these programs that work on a local level.
And to be clear, I'm not saying it's not helpful. I'm just trying to explore different ways to share that information so that our shared time is as effective as possible. So whether it's a document, whether it's a presentation, that's really up to the group, but I think it's great to share those things and get them out there, certainly. Yeah.
You know, something Kyle said, you made a good point that part of our chart, I think, is sharing some of the tools and maybe tools that don't exist to the legislature. It might be that some of these presentations would be appropriate. I think we're going to be presenting to the Water Resources and Ag Committee. It might be that that's a good forum for some of it. Some of it might be good for here, but then some of it might be useful as a presentation out. Here are recommendations, and here, just so you have larger context for some of the tools that are currently working. If we're going to talk about additional tools, it might be good to provide context for what are the current tools. So I don't know. I mean, if we had more time, I think it'd be great, but trying to balance it, I wonder if some of it can be part of our outward presentation and some of it maybe is appropriate for in this room.
Has time, so I want to kind of just be respectful of everyone's time, people who need to catch planes, people who have made transportation plans. I don't want to so I wonder, I know there are rules around our not talking outside of this time, so if there's anything, last thoughts, and then I want to give us our homework and give people the opportunity to do the things they need to do.
I have a data request.
Okay.
From the state, if possible.
Pardon me?
I have a
Data
data
request.
request. I think it'd be really helpful to have numbers from the state on, you know, how much Colorado River water is consumed by municipalities on the West Slope. We know the numbers of the Trans Mountain diversions for the municipalities on the Front Range. What is consumed by agriculture, by basin, how much water leaves the state, average dry, wet year, you know, sort of those basic numbers. So as we're talking about, because I think one of the things around demand reduction is, what does the number mean? Like, I would love to share what we've done in terms of demand reduction, but the numbers, you know, we say 20%, huge. but the actual volumetric number might not be quite as impressive, right? So I think having numbers would be really helpful to put things in context.
Is that something the advisory member can provide, or is that we need to look at elsewhere?
We'll look into that, Jason.
Yes.
We still have Kevin's presentation. I guess, check in to see if people have 10 minutes in your life to get that taken care of today, or if we want to move that.
You know that Lisa, you mentioned you needed to leave to catch a plane. You have 10 minutes?
I'm gonna go Mark Twain style, plays Pat Cal.
You have an option
I'm
to,
gonna give it to you in like 3 minutes instead of 10.
All right.
And I noticed in the last meeting, there were some questions that caused me to say, does everybody understand really what compact compliance is, where we are in this? And several of you have seen this several times, but I got the feeling some people could get a basic understanding of this. And as I do this, I want to put a placeholder right now. Alex, you asked Amy about interstate commitments, and Amy's answer was 75 or 10. And I just want to ask the question, is that what the sponsors meant when they said interstate commitments, or is interstate commitments bigger than just what I call a compact compliance obligation? So, we're doing. This is my disclaimer. I'm just here to give you facts. I've talked about this before. This doesn't end with me saying, therefore you should. I'm just going to give you facts and data and stop right there. That's my advisory non-voting role. The compact says in Article 3D that the states of the upper division will not cause the flow of the river at Lee Ferry to be depleted below 75 million acre feet for any period of 10 consecutive years. So we're going to look at the data for that in 1 minute. But to me, as the state engineer, Becky, Amy, all of you talk about SCPP and man management and all these things. And I'm very interested in that. But then when I go back to my office and look at what my responsibilities are, it's what happens if we cause the flow to go below 75 million acre feet in 10 years, because then I need to be active in some way. So that's that standard for maintaining compact compliance, nothing else. We had an allocation, 7.5 million acre feet. That's not compact compliance in my mind. Then the Upper Colorado River Compact says curtailment may be necessary if that flow is depleted below Article 3, and we caused it. UCRC sets the quantity and time of curtailment for each state. So they're the ones that make the decision. They're going to come to us. And then the state, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, we determine how to meet that obligation. But remember, as Amy said, and you'll always hear us say, that's premised on an inquiry. Did the 4 upper basin states cause the flow to deplete below 75 million acre feet in 10 years?
Can you tell everyone where Lee Ferry is? Like where do you?
Yes, so picture that great map of the entire Colorado River Basin from California, Arizona, Nevada on up into the Colorado and Wyoming headwaters. And at the border between Utah and Arizona is Lake Powell and Glen Canyon Dam just below that. That's the upper basin, basically, from there on up. And right below Lake Powell or Glen Canyon Dam is Lee Ferry. That's where that 75 million acre feet needs to pass by every goal in 10 years. I've got a great map in a different form that I can show. Thanks, Jackie. Just quickly, here's what I just talked about. For each year, 2004 through 2022, this is in the books. This is data. The flow that went past Lee Ferry. It's almost always, it is always above 7.5 million, okay, until 2022. So that's how we stay in good stead with that 75 million in 10. If we're always above 7.5 million for any 10 years, we're always gonna have good numbers, and we do. We were at 102 million in 2004. That's gone down, it went up in 2012 due to a good year. But here we are, even in 2022, 85 million compared to what? 75 million. Take a closer look. They're in the green. That's the last 6 rows of what I just showed you. 85 million in 2022 is our 10-year total.
For 2023 and 2024. That's what I'm calling a current projection, but really, that information is from the Bureau of Reclamation 24-month study, the July 24-month study. 9215 at Lee Ferry for 2023. Sorry, 9,215,000 for 2024, 7.6 million. There we are, still at 86 million, but that's above 75 million. Here's my conservative state engineer's assumption for planning only. Don't write that down, but 7 million acre feet for 2025. I add 150,000, which is probably a little less than the Bureau of Reclamation does for inflows between Glen Canyon Dam and Lee Ferry, like the Pkwy River. And that gives us 84 million in 2025. Can I guarantee that? No. Pretty based on good published data and conservative assumptions. So my only point today is that graphical point. There's where we are in 2025. There's 25 years of flow, actual through 2022. The red line is 75 million. We're still well above it. You can see the way the numbers trend. It's unlikely. Maybe that's never been.
That's how I'm keeping
hot.
your presentation
But-
short.
But yeah, that's the hook that I just got. So that's where we stand. And so even though these are just my opinions or positions, it's factual information. That's my opinion and position. We're in compliance now, 75 million acre feet in 10. We're under allocation, as you've heard, of 7.5 million. The upper basin states, 4.5, 3.5 last year. Did you say 2.5 for Colorado?
Yeah, about 2.5. I think it's 2.6 is the most we've ever used.
Yeah.
In a really way.
And I really want to make this point. The status of current curtailment, interstate administration, that's what we're doing. It's based on our water supply. We do prior appropriation. I have no basis to curtail for compact purposes. Somebody asked me, should we get ahead of the game? Can we build our numbers up? Should we be curtailing? Should I even be encouraging people to use less? No. You have a water right. You're in priority, you have a beneficial use for it. That's what we do. We use our water for economic purposes here in Colorado. So you all might develop something different in this task, but I will not. That's in my role. And just to, we heard something about this last year ago. I have no basis to compel federal project releases, no authority to shepherd that released water past other water rights. And I don't think I do that as fast as I wanted to, but that's all I have. Yeah.
Kevin, this is Bart's voice. How does Mexico factor into that, the compact obligation or potential obligations? Like what might the upper basin have to do beyond what's an article you just put?
My non-lawyer's understanding of that is that at a time when we're underusing our allocation and the lower basin states are overusing their allocation, that it's not something for the upper basin states to concern themselves with. But as quickly as I said that, I will turn it over to the attorneys.
And until lower basin provides tributary accounting, we own nothing. Mexico.
That would be all of our.
Thank you, Steve.
And as I'm sure we will feel each time, there's so much to talk about and negative amounts of time remaining today. But I'll give Kathy a minute to wrap up, but I just want to say, as a reminder, we'll send these out on email as well. But your homework, as we have set it forth so far, is to think about what specific things we would like to hear from the public so that we can try to put that out for people's thoughts to say, how would we like to be informed? I mean, any comments will be welcome, but like those very specific ones, we'd like to have you come up with a list or come prepared next time to talk about those. And then the second one is in terms of how we progress, anybody has, a framework they want to suggest, if anybody, we will take the information that you have given us today and we'll put it on that framework that you already saw. But if you have other suggestions or things we didn't get to consider in terms of topics we should cover, please send those to us. And now Kathy Kelsey, who wants to say the final word of today?
I'm just gonna say real quick, I will be sending out an email that has all of the logistical information that I didn't get to today. That's perfectly fine. It was one of those things we were totally comfortable bumping because we anticipated this. And that is good. Now we weren't as close, we're 15 minutes off, but so that will include reimbursement information and SharePoint access information, that kind of thing. And then also reminding you of the homework assignments.
Thanks for driving here. Thanks Aurora for facilities. It's been great. Take a look at the notes if you haven't looked at them from the last meeting, and then the one from this meeting, we will approve those next time. I will pursue along with the Lightning Group the possibility of doing in-person meetings and whether or not get that funded. And I think anything that you can add to the pile of collected work, sort of like doing a dissertation on a literature review, just dumping everything in there, I think will be really helpful. And couple things that came up today were the Colorado Water Plan. And then I know that there are a lot of reports out there about the actual hydrology of the Colorado River. That may be as well. In the meantime, holler if you need anything, have ideas.
If you do need leads, we'll bring them meeting to meeting. We will shepherd them meeting to meeting for you.
Can I just say one thing? I really don't want to be dismissive of the other groups presenting your water savings. So I don't know if that can be an open question we can address, but with only 3 hours, maybe we can tack on some additional so we can hear. Because I really do think it's important, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the table. And I did not mean to be dismissive of the idea, and I'm sure other people have concepts they'd like to share too.
I just wonder if can we get it in written format? That's so.
I just had a quick thought, and I don't know if this is allowed, but if there could be like an added virtual meeting with just education to fill in the gaps. And I'm not saying it could be optional for people to join, but just for.
It's a good suggestion. I mean, we could record them and people who are struggling for time could watch them outside of time as well.
Yeah, maybe if you have specific things that you're interested in, we can
Like
connect
the
you.
water saving projects.
That's good though.
Any other words for good of the order? You do. Travel safely. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.